Welcome to the Village of Pleasantville. We're having a special work session tonight to talk about issues associated with the development moratorium, the results of the study that we engaged from BFJ. For anyone who might be listening to this who hasn't seen it, we have a 20-something page document. It's available online at pleasantville-ny.gov, which is the results of an analysis done by our planners, BFJ Planning. So I'm just trying to find that thing I sent you this morning, which was a rough agenda. First time I had was a quick overview of the BFJ conclusions, which I think everybody's read. I think that the thrust of it is based on their analysis of the soft sites, that is the sites BFJ identified as being reasonably imaginable for substantial development, the potential impacts of that, school kids, emergency response, and the like, use of water, all of the above, were relatively modest in the view of BFJ. So certainly we've had some contrary views about that, but my personal take on it is the pieces of it that I think are not even subject to much question are the impacts on schools and emergency services, both of which seem to be well managed. So any comments from anybody about their thoughts or about comments you're hearing from constituents?
No, I would say that there's a range of comments. I feel like I personally have been getting more comments in support of having some development downtown, just to put it simply. I feel like I've been hearing more from that section of the village lately.
Yeah, me too. Mostly because of the Examiner article.
Yeah, I think it's because of the Examiner article, right?
So we got, as you know, there's a letter to the editor in the Examiner today expressing a contrary view. Rosemary Swazi sent a very long email in the vein of what you just described.
Yeah.
You're hearing, what are you hearing, Michael?
Well, first, getting back to the BFJ report, I think I initially felt like it was, I was initially skeptical about its projections of how many apartments might go in the A1 districts at these soft sites. What helped me understand their view was how difficult it is to park the sites. When I went through the report's description of each one on a case-by-case basis and imagined what would it look like to meet our parking requirements, and also for the building to break even or be profitable, it looked like there's not as much of a threat as I had thought. So that for me was the biggest picture item coming out of the report. I'm not sure or if we're on agenda item 2 of their recommendations, I'm not sure what I think yet. I'd like to talk tonight about more about some of the FAR bonus proposals, just to make sure I understand exactly what the upshot of those would be. But again, my main takeaway was that I'm less concerned based on the difficulty of parking the sites for residential. The more I thought about it and read into it. Second thing I would say right off the bat is a lot of the people that I have talked to have expressed a concern that I've come to summarize as not wanting to feel surrounded by buildings. And it's come up in a number of different ways where people at the extreme end might say, we're going to turn into New Rochelle, or we're going to turn into White Plains, or things that are would be very, very, very far down the line. Not that that's even a bad thing in some people's mind, but it would be very far down the line. I don't think that's a realistic way of expressing it, but I am sympathetic to people who say, I moved here from I moved here from a place where I felt surrounded by the human built environment and felt surrounded by buildings, and I don't want to now build up a place in that same vein. I hesitate to use the word urban because we are a municipality and we have a village core that has some urban features, like some features of first floor retail and walkability, and kind of pedestrian zones. But I hesitate to use the word because it can mean a lot of different things, a lot of different people, right? But at risk of rambling here, that sense of no one feels surrounded, I do want to at least honor that and give voice to that. That's what I'm hearing a good bit. And it's not necessarily the same typecast type of people. Some of them say that because they moved here from New York City and they don't want to have that feeling anymore. Others say it out of a more environmentalist or ecologically minded sense. Others say it just because they want some kind of harmony between the built environment and the natural environment, and they feel like we are lacking green space in the village center. We have it at the periphery. We're lacking it in the center, and they don't want to continue to have more brick and concrete when we could be doing some other things. So, yeah, those are my
Right, so
two big picture thoughts.
to unpack a little bit of that, just nothing definitive, but so from the end first, wanting more green space downtown, not more brick and concrete.
Yeah.
Certainly what we have seen and the sites that have been discussed are already brick and concrete. They're not green spaces.
Right.
It's not as though there's any one of these sites that has any green space at all. So, I hear some of the same, sort of top level concerns of people, and yet the overlay to that in part is some would say, I want to keep everything the way it was or is based on the present. And that's a conversation I've gotten into with a few people, especially about 70 Memorial, who think that building is too big.
Yep.
And as you dig into what was there before, some would say, as someone did at our November 16th meeting, well, it was better. That building on top of the rock was better. And what I would characterize as a rather grim street front along there between the post office and what's now Taco Project was really one of the worst streetscapes we had. And the building itself was slowly rotting away. So the double bind that we are in a circumstance that is detailed analysis in 2017 that led to the zoning change said, okay, pretty much nothing is likely to happen on that site unless you unlock some more economic potential that would make it possible. And so some would argue that, as some have to me, that adding a fourth floor in that block was the wrong thing. It shouldn't have been done. Look what happened. And of course, the underlying thinking at the time it was done was didn't know what building we would get, but hoping something would happen there, because otherwise we were confronted with a sort of a white elephant. So the concern about being, sort of hemmed in by buildings is also, obviously in part it's the eye of the beholder, but I have had a chat with a number of people, and I brought up Tarrytown as an example, where especially on the main drag down towards the Hudson, you have taller buildings on both sides, and much better, more interesting building stock than we have, because much of it has been preserved, and so it has a lot more character than a lot of our newer, older buildings.
Yeah.
But folks don't have the same reaction to that. That doesn't feel hemmed in part because it's vibrant and interesting, and there are all these things that mitigate what could otherwise feel like a little bit of a canyon between buildings. And so that leads me to the, okay, well, how do you create vibrant and interesting in a world where we're not going to get the same things we once had? And the reality is that a site like the current 70 Memorial would look just the way it did in 2017 had we not made that zoning change, odds are. Locking up sites like that have clearly turned into problematic sites is not a great forward-thinking strategy, which doesn't mean that the means of unlocking it feel good to everybody. But I will say most of the people that I have an extended conversation with come to see some of these decisions differently. Not that we necessarily will fully agree, but as is always the case, a lot of people are inclined to say, doesn't the village even think about these things? Is it just a grab for money? You just want tax dollars. You don't care what happens to the schools. You don't care what happens to, and of course, none of that is true. And of course, folks also don't, as perfectly understand, consider the question of the long-term viability of the tax base and what does it look like to live here in a world where it's increasingly difficult to live here. So the letter to the editor today by Scott Dyer is anti-development, kind of implies that the village board is looking to build it out to the max, which I'll reach out to him. I don't think our zoning approximates building out to the max even in any significant way. But at one point he says, there's all this going up, and where's the affordable housing? Where's the place that seniors might live? He makes reference to the fact that a previous board did not pass the senior assisted living project. So, that's all true. The previous board didn't. Jonathan voted for it. I voted against it. But that project, just as one example, that was up at the Methodist Church, was like in those dollars, was like a $35 million project that involved a massive amount of dirt and trees dug out to sort of try to bury this thing into the hillside. Yeah. It would have been, I think, at least during its construction, the most impactful construction ever in the history of Pleasanton. So, and that, whether it was right or wrong, good or bad, advantages worth the disadvantages. That's another example where people would like to see more housing, more options for themselves or family members. But in the end, we're not going to get them without some of these changes. So,
can I raise an issue that's potentially going to throw another wrench into the equation? But since I feel like everything should be a little bit on the table right now. So I have a question about our current parking requirements in the A1 district. So what are our parking requirements, say, for a 1-bedroom apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment, and so on?
So we'd have to pull it up to give you the exact numbers, but in the 2017 rezoning, we reduced the parking requirements.
Okay. From
where they had been.
Okay.
Some would argue, Phil Myrick wrote us a memo many, many years ago, advocating a whole lot of steps that could be taken to reduce the requirement for parking. Mm-hmm. So where are you headed?
Well, so there are a few things I'm thinking about. One is, I know that Michael's concern is specifically about the block on Memorial Plaza, where 70 Memorial Plaza is going up because of the 4-story buildings.
I'm listening, I'm just looking for
which have a different visual impact, obviously, than the 3-story buildings. And I think the reason one of the reasons that was zoned that way is because the requirement for underground parking made it expensive enough to build a building that in order for anybody to develop on that site, they would have to develop to 4 stories. That was the calculation that was made at any rate. In addition, and I'm not an expert on this, but there's some new and not so new research that has gone out suggesting that parking requirements are one of the main things that hinder the affordability of housing, because it's very expensive to build parking. And so, you know, the higher the parking requirement, the more expensive it is to build the building, the more difficult it is to build affordable housing. And finally, the more parking you have, the more traffic you generate. So I'm just curious, particularly for that one block, about, and again, this is all speculative because I need to obviously know what our current requirements are and, you know, how flexible we could be with that. But if we're looking at downtown housing and what we're hoping to generate is more foot traffic, more commuters, less traffic, and potentially provide more affordable housing, if that is a variable that we should look at tweaking. So
let me just say one thing about that, and that is there's lots of commentary to that effect, and that was sort of the direction Phil talked to us way back. I don't even know if he was on the planning commission at the time. But if we were to reduce the parking requirements, either based on the belief that we are requiring more than is really needed, that would be removing one of the significant impediments to development and would very likely generate more development.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. But so I'm not necessarily, I'm not even necessarily suggesting we do it. I'm just sort of entering it as a topic of conversation. But I'm thinking about it specifically for that one block in particular, because of the concern about the height of the buildings being one of the factors that is in play. And whether, you know, that's something that we could consider for that one block and potentially have lower buildings and, you know, therefore make it feel like a little bit less of a built environment, and be able to have some slightly more affordable housing. I don't obviously know the answer to these questions. I'm just raising them as questions right now. We would need more feedback. We would need feedback from BFJ on this issue, but, you know, I've been reading on this a little bit, and so it felt like something that was worth asking.
I would like to know more also, you know, reading the 2 iterations of this report and the commentary, it really seems like from an evidence perspective that BFJ's answered the questions that the villagers who were concerned had asked. I understand that they may not accept the answers. That's understandable because, you know, a lot of this is emotional. It's about seeing change in a place that you love, and, you know, change is always difficult, and people react differently to change. So, but I continue to believe that the actual danger that we're facing, the thing that will change the character of the village the most, is a lack of affordability. You know, the idea of a multi-generational family living in separate dwellings in the same village is not really achievable or affordable for most families, you know, anymore. And there's a whole host of unintended consequences of spiraling real estate prices. You know, just a minor one is that everybody who works in the village will end up not living in the village, and that will create more traffic for us. So people who talk about traffic as a concern and are against development, particularly transit-oriented development, you know, within a block or 2 of a train line, are sort of talking at mixed purposes, you know, because the one thing can negatively impact the other thing. So I would like to know more. You know, I don't have a conclusion, but I definitely like the idea, because all of the things that we're talking about could gradually over time expand the inventory of available rental units, which might have some effect on the market. But the thing for sure that would add somewhat lower price units is a lower parking requirement, because that changes the economics of the actual building. So
let me just hold that thought. Prior to the 2017 change, our requirements were one parking space per studio apartment 1.5 spaces per 1-bedroom apartment, and 1.75 spaces for a 2-bedroom apartment, plus a half space for each additional bedroom in excess of 2.
Okay.
And
And
of course, it would round up. They were changed to one space for a studio, 1 space for a 1-bedroom, 1.5 spaces for a 2-bedroom, 2 spaces for a unit of 3 bedrooms or more.
I know so many people who live in our village in houses who have 3 or even 4-bedroom houses that have 1 car.
So wait, I'm
when
sorry,
they're walking.
I'm a little slow. So 2-bedroom was 1.5 and 3-bedroom was what?
2.
2?
2 bedrooms, 1.5, and 3 bedrooms or more is 2 spaces.
Okay.
So I do think, I'm not trying to
I mean,
harm anybody, but I think it's worth looking at.
Or let me just say, just in the category of the practical consideration we confront, we declared this moratorium because a whole bunch of people said too much, too fast, too much development.
yeah,
We've gone through this analysis, which we have before us, but the direction to possibly reduce the parking requirements below where they were changed to in 2017 would likely increase development. And the question is, that's obviously the opposite direction of what those folks asked of us.
Right, but
okay, but what if theoretically, sorry to interrupt, but what if theoretically, this is a thought exercise, right?
Okay.
If we took that one block and
Which block?
I'm not even
The
sure
one
that
with
this is,
4,000?
we reduced the parking requirements slightly, but we also reduced the number of stories that you could build. You would end up potentially with fewer apartments on that one block, not more, right?
So conceivably, you have to think about, I wouldn't.
I don't know. I mean,
It would
maybe
take
it's
some-
not a realistic proposal,
So-
but I'm just,
And my point is different, which is simply that people came with a concern. The concern generated an investigation and evidence, and we should now take the village in the direction that the evidence points. And the evidence actually points that we are not overbuilt and that our services, our infrastructure, our schools all actually have room, and that the issue I see really again is a supportability issue, so that we should pivot to look at that.
yeah, well, I mean, then the other affordability question is, should we increase the percentage of affordability? Should we consider that? Which that would potentially also, that would have a slowing probably
Right.
impact on development.
Right.
Well, and so
So-
the interesting question about that is, would you have achieved, if the reason for doing that was to try to generate more affordable apartments, would the result be to reduce
Yes,
any potential construction? Because now,
right,
the grim reality, we heard this at NICOM, which we already knew, is that there are no middle income affordable units being built anywhere in these parts, except through a private subsidy. There isn't federal money for it. Essentially, what happens is the community at large accepts reduced property taxes on whatever piece is affordable, and the owner, developer, builder, whoever it is, accepts less income
right.
on the percentage of their project that is affordable. So, I mean, were you at that presentation about Pelham? There was a presentation at the NICOM conference, Chance Mullen, the mayor, Village of Pelham, but a developer.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Developer who's doing a thing there, and he said, look, I got a spreadsheet. It's not a lot different from the spreadsheet all of my colleagues or competitors use, which is, here's what it costs me to build, here's what I can generate, here's what my taxes are going to be. Make any of those things different, and I either need more units or fewer units in order to achieve a return. We don't all take the same view of what return we're seeking, but we can't get financing on a project unless we have a spreadsheet that we can hand to a financing agent, a bank or whatever, and say, here's a project that has a reasonable chance of turning a profit, whatever it is, and therefore we'll pay you back over time the money you lend us. And in the end, when in the hypothetical, if we said, okay, we have a 10% set aside for affordable, if we went to 20%, that would mean that somebody would need to get some other relief. More units at market rate, less parking, a pilot, reduced taxes, you name it, any of the levers that can rebalance it to produce a project that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing about the percentage thing, like you were saying, is that it then has a slowing effect on development, which overall increases the cost of housing.
Well, it could be. I guess my concern about all of this is that we just spent money and time and stopped at least one developer from developing based on the concerns of some people, which, given the pandemic and everything else, I think it was fair to say things may have changed. We should really understand that we've all experienced traffic, et cetera, et cetera. Now they've come back, but we know we have this outstanding issue, regardless of whether we think that the master plan was right and our zoning is correct or not. We know that we have the affordability issue. I would like to turn everything Peter and everybody else is saying could be correct, but I would really actually like professional analysis on these questions of what could we do to stimulate actual affordable housing in the village.
Yeah, I mean, my fear is that it's tricky unless you do something like reduce the parking requirement, which would, you would have to do on I don't know, either in a targeted or on a bigger scale, but I think the problem is that the affordability issue is a regional problem. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do anything, but I'm not sure that we actually have the power to solve the problem.
Well,
So
we may or may not, but I'm just saying, like, unless
yeah.
we do the same thing we just did.
Yeah.
Just actually ask professionals to say, go around and look at who has experience with this around the country and what the experiences have been and what actually works. And if the answer is nothing, then we've got an answer. I don't want to create the dystopian apocalypse that, some people are afraid of. But on the other hand, I would like to live in a village where, somebody who's teaching instead of in finance could have their mom move into the village and that those people could both live here.
So, I mean, following on to what Nicole said, I have all of those goals and have seen quite a change in the many years I've lived here. I think the reality is there are a lot of forces going on here that are far beyond our capacity to have much of an effect on. And the value of property is at this point so high that it is extraordinarily difficult to imagine anything being built that would substantially reduce the cost of housing. The governor's plan, which in the end didn't get executed, but the last discussion about that certainly hasn't been had, was based in part on the idea of very significantly increasing the supply of housing in order to slow the factors that have caused such a run up in values. At the scale of a 10% increase in housing statewide, we have not quite, but almost achieved the 10% increase in housing over the last 6, 7, 8 years, starting with Toll Brothers, in a time period with set asides for affordability, in a time period when the rents and purchase prices have skyrocketed. And honestly, skyrocketed for a bunch of factors that are perfectly understandable, including the fact that it's a great place to live, but also skyrocketed for a bunch of factors that there's just nothing we can do about it at the present time.
That may be true. And while I respect the expertise of all the different people on this board, I don't think we are actually experts. And I'm not yet convinced that, for instance, designating one block or 3 buildings or something like that and saying a lower parking requirement and a long-term tax abatement, if this is, half of market rate or something like that, something targeted, wouldn't create the possibility for
so,
that kind of
I mean,
development.
the idea of, for example, a long-term tax abatement falls into territory that we've never edged into. I'm not saying we should have a discussion, but I will say I'm not sure whether, I mean, clearly that isn't, I don't think, a matter that affects whether we should or should not allow the moratorium to sunset. And if we do, whether we should change the zoning in some way based on this discussion.
Well, that is true, but to be clear, we're discussing a report that we had issued that has conclusions to it. And what I'm saying is that I don't think we know everything that we need to know to have the optimal zoning in our A1 district.
But I'm gonna support Peter for a second. Like,
You can do it for more than a second.
I'm switching hats here.
Don't hesitate.
I'm just gonna say, I share with you, David, the feeling that this has been an opportunity to think about all kinds of issues with respect to housing, and I think that we should continue to have that discussion. And I'll mention another thought that I had in a second. I'm actually curious what you think, John. But perhaps our first task is to decide whether or not to extend the moratorium, whether or not to make any changes to the zoning that were specific to the reasons for which we established the moratorium. So now that I'm saying that, I'm realizing it's not quite as cut and dried as it might be, but anyway, so maybe one of the things we need to think about is this sequence. So for instance, if you're proposing we need to dig into the affordability issue more, and I think that that's something that we all talked about and are all interested in, maybe that's something that we have to do after we make the decision on the moratorium. I was just going to say one additional piece that I wonder about with the housing issue is what's going to happen is that if there's a major downturn in the economy, another thing that they're talking about is this brain drain from New York City. Like a lot of people are, a lot of young people are moving away from New York City. Like, what are the forces that may actually change this that we have, no control over either, and that we don't know anything about, which is part of what's maddening about trying to think on a big scale about these issues. Yeah.
Sorry, finish.
No, I'm finished. That's pretty much what I was.
No, I don't disagree with you. I just think that, what we were asked to do was to reconsider the 2017 master plan. And we got information, including some that we didn't pay for, which has to do with any of you who remember what happened with marijuana, remember that it went into the state budget and it disappeared, and then it came back, and then suddenly it was, all over the state. So I think anybody who entertains the fantasy that the state's intervention in affordable housing or in our zoning is over, that's just it. It's fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Clearly is coming back.
Yeah.
No doubt.
So
In what form, we don't know.
exactly. So while I agree that we need to decide whether we're going to extend the moratorium or not, I don't agree that the board is prohibited or enjoined from actually exploring the factors that prevent this from being a thriving multi-income village, and that this is the appropriate time to continue that. Again, not saying we're going to take any actions tomorrow. These things take months or years sometimes to investigate and decide. But I think saying, oh, these people asked us about this, therefore we're only going to look at this and we'll be done, is it's not what we're actually here to do.
No, I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think part of what Peter was saying was, let's take step one and then.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, regardless of anyone's position on any of the things that have been tossed around here, we have a significant percentage of the community that is struggling with some of the changes they see, whether it's from the way the world used to be to the way it is, whether it's changes they disapprove of, whether it's things they don't like about the way things look, whether it's traffic, whether it's, any of the above, some discomfort with that. And some of those things ease as you start to see the impacts or not, depending on who you are. I would say, for example, I'm very anxious to see the streetscape in front of 70 Memorial finally open. That may be later this week. Smoke permitting, they were going to mill and pave and all of that. Because I have to say, and I think most people I've talked to and shown them what's going on, they're saying, well, okay, the building's really big, but this streetscape is nice. The walkway is beautifully landscaped. Those things are improvements relative to what we had before. So for some people who just think the building is way too big, that is all true, but nowhere near enough to counterbalance it. And for some other people who I've talked to, it's like, oh, no, I didn't quite think of it that way. I didn't quite realize that. I see that these things really do feel like better things. So long way around saying it takes a while for people to see what's going on and see its impact. That's true for us too. And some of what we heard from people was exactly that, sometimes written a little bit larger, stop it all for 5 years. Let's see what happens. Let's see how it looks. That's obviously not realistic, and it's not fair to lock up people's properties. And you could easily turn the village into a development pariah by flip-flopping around to that degree. But I guess I have been criticized on some occasions, but probably wear the label of incrementalist with some pride, which is to say the arc of progress bends towards light, but it takes some time to do it.
I don't disagree with any of that, and I also feel like I'm an incrementalist, but I want to point out the one thing that you said that I think is not factually accurate is that a large percentage, you said a significant percentage of the village objected to that. We don't actually know what a significant percentage of the village thinks, and we never will, because the reality is it's impossible to command the attention of a significant percent of the village unless an asteroid landed in the middle of it.
Right.
And what we hear on every issue that we deal with, this is not just development, is we hear from the people who are upset about something that's happening in particular, whether that's the pool or whatever. We do not hear from the people who are happy about things because they have no reason to complain.
Or the large number of people who are just not engaged at that level.
Exactly.
They're living their lives.
Exactly. So that is why I think it's incumbent upon us to absolutely answer questions when people have them, but also take that slow, steady road to the future, which involves investigating the issues that we perceive that may not yet be on the radar. Some of the people are concerned about the thing that has last happened, like the traffic or, buildings going up.
So I mostly agree with everything you said, just as you said you agree with everything I said. The piece I think is important is everybody's a little bit right on almost every subject. And the fact that you end up with 200, however many people we had on November 16th, the auditorium, feeling the way we feel, they felt, for whatever reasons, and it's a wide constellation of reasons, is to be validated. I don't come out of a meeting like that, bigger meeting than we almost ever have, more people coming out than we almost ever get, just as you fairly point out, people come out when they've got a bad esteem about something, but that's to be validated, just as it is a case when you have some much smaller issue. There's one person very angsty about it, and even if you disagree with them, even if the ultimate decision isn't what they would have sought, it's I think our goal as a government, not always easy to achieve, that even people who didn't get what they wanted, even people who disagree with the action, can respect the process by which it was achieved and feel like they were heard. And I will say, let me just say, and I don't mean this as criticism of you, but I've certainly had some sense that from people, they've said to me, the idea that the board or has said at points, we heard from the noisemakers, but we haven't heard from the vast majority of people who didn't say anything, felt to some as though that kind of invalidated their show of force about their issues.
nothing could be more validating to a group of people than a 6-month moratorium that cease all development, cease at least 2 active projects, definitively. That is a real concrete action that came from that. So I don't
What's
think
the
there's,
other project that not season?
well, I mean, we were considering the,
You mean the
Yeah.
sale of the,
exactly.
you want to say something, Jonathan?
I was just gonna say that, in reaction, a couple of observations. One, certainly in my time behind that dais, and I'm sure it's your same experience, you never have the luxury of knowing what the entire village wants to know. You're constantly making decisions based on a small majority of people that come out here. You voted to do $3 to $5 million on a pool with a couple hundred people, that are in support of it. And that's just the
A
reality.
lot more than a couple of hundred
Well,
in that case. It's,
Yeah, okay.
see, he's advocating, or
Maybe it's 1,000 people, whatever. I'm just
All right.
saying that it is a, what you don't run into though is a show of force. I don't want it to sound like it was the community against you, but enough passion in the community to muster up an auditorium full of people who basically spoke with one voice. And I'll tell you that the characterization, and I'm sure you didn't mean it this way, Peter, that people see change and are afraid of it. That's not what's going on. People feel a change, and that's what they're reacting to.
I wasn't.
Yeah, I just want to
judgment.
make that distinction that,
Yeah.
when you're sitting on Bedford Road, backed up past Holy Innocents, trying to get through town at 4:30 in the morning or 4:30 in the afternoon. That is, something that is tangible. It's not, oh, I see this potential big building here and I'm afraid.
So can I just, again, I've had this conversation with you and other people.
Okay.
The piece of that is to unpack the question of why is that? If you're stopped in traffic at Holy Innocents trying to get through town at 4:30, is that because of anything we did, or is that because of the world around us? And to the extent that it's because of the world around us, what does that mean about what we should do, right?
I sent in a response to the BFJ, more questions than really, and some pushback just for consideration. I don't think that it is clear in my mind. And again, I've always been in the position that I'm not afraid of development in this village. I don't think it's too, I am concerned at the pace. I wish we had the luxury of slowing it down. The moratorium has had that effect to a degree. We had, in all fairness, and we had that walk around. I walked around with you, the mayor, on Sunday. We went down to the new building on, the Atwood?
Atwood, yep.
And it was very quiet. And, my observation was, okay, Sunday afternoon, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, maybe this is the way it always is. But if this is the impact, even a greater impact, smaller, but some additional impact, but the relative impact of these buildings, then sure, the village could probably handle more development. But I think the concern about schools, certainly you get no argument from me. There's room in the schools if you could just evenly distribute 50 kids across the 12 grades. But do small apartments generally favor having younger families? So you don't have 50 kids across 12 grades, you have 50 kids at BRS. Well, that's a bit different dynamic.
Although still a lower enrollment at BRS than existed.
But if
10 years ago.
I'd be interested to know from the schools. We added 50 kids to BRS. You take a distribution, but we added 50 kids to BRS. What does that mean in terms of what they need to hire, aides, teachers, how they have to reconfigure classrooms, that kind of thing? It may be there's no impact, but I think there's room for that to explore some of that if you guys feel that's the case.
Well, but not to interrupt, but just, on that,
Please.
Part of that question is we, as you know, have looked at the last 45 years of school enrollment and ups and downs. And, now we're almost the same place as we were when we started in 1976. what is the reality of that? The highest level enrollment in history in these 45 years was 2009, utterly unrelated to any construction. Ever since then, it's been trending down as it has been statewide, regional wide, I think national. We talked about colleges, the whole enrollment cliff that they have confronted. Could that flip around? Sure. Does it seem that there's any reason to believe that families are going to start having 3 or 4 or 5 kids with greater frequency, or even with the frequency that they did generations ago? It doesn't seem like that's even imaginable. But the other question is, if your pursuit of everything you do in your village is driven by the desire to maintain the status quo, what do you do when things you can't control are changing rocket fast? And part of what we've seen, conversations I've had with some folks, and again, no judgment, just kicking out all these other issues that I've been sidecar to for all these many years. We can't just leave it the way it is. We can't just leave 444 Bedford Road. It's not going to stay the way it is, and it wouldn't be good for the village for it to stay the way it is, 65% empty. And so what do? Right? So what it would be, I would love nothing better than to have a bank move in there and restore that thing to a great old bank space of the sort we all remember. It pained me no end when Chase moved in there and put up their blue neon and all of that.
Right.
But it isn't going to happen.
I
Banks
don't
work,
disagree,
right?
except to say that, and I'm not gonna pick on 444, I'm just gonna say in general, my observation has been landlords have viewed their buildings in this village as 50-year cash cows. They've done very little reinvestments into their buildings. And had they done that all along, a lot of these properties wouldn't be in a state of repair that makes anything short of a substantial redo something that you can't work with.
Well, and
so-
again, so whether that's true or not in some cases.
But yeah, but again, I mean,
what is
again,
it?
does the village zoning need to bail them out of years of not doing maybe what they should have done to foresee the changes? I mean, do we have to bear the brunt of the changes that
Zoning
they
is-
didn't want to do? I don't know.
Zoning is not about moral hazard. Zoning is about the economic benefit to the village over the long term. Claire, sorry.
Can I say
Please.
some things?
Please.
I have a lot of thoughts about this.
You did that. We have 2 live audience members.
Since
You
I'm
need to be
here,
validated.
since it seems.
1.5 live.
I'm just gonna go kind of through a little bit in reverse order because they're in the place they are in my brain most recently. So as Jonathan said, it's true, you're not gonna get a mandate from the village, unless we had a moratorium on every single question. So expand his garage, and so, right? And so I have great faith in you as a board. We elect you to make decisions based on, we know you care about the village. We all have slightly different priorities. Some of us care more about some than others, but I feel pretty confident that you're not ever going to do anything that is grossly inappropriate or detrimental to the village. So those hypothetical people quoted are saying, are you just out in it to milk a lot of money out of developers or something to what? To enrich our village? No, I think we all share generally the same feeling about the welfare of the village. So I do think you can't hope for that clear-cut opinion or a referendum, right? And I have a lot of faith in your abilities to look at the data. And from what I'm hearing tonight, and from reading the report, and you get all the way through it, but I read some of it. David was good enough to send it to me this afternoon, but I was on my phone, so I haven't seen it all. That's important data, and it sounds like from listening to you discuss it that you gleaned a lot of things that are helpful for going forward. And I think in the end, you can make reasoned decisions about how to go forward. For instance, places where it shows there's not a huge impact. That's data, and we can go with that. That said, I'm sympathetic in a very, very limited way to the people who say, well, what about all these changes I'm seeing? It's too much too fast. And I'm wondering, I'm just throwing this out as an idea, to extend the moratorium a little bit further, or some version of a moratorium further, maybe through the end of 2023, because I understand the one development is 50% occupied. The big Memorial Plaza one is expected to be occupied by the end of the year.
So that
If we could let people live with all these other.
the Atwood is fully leased now, with the exception of
Atwood
this,
is the one along.
the sawmill, with the
Okay,
exception
I
of the
didn't know that
affordable
name,
units,
yeah.
which are not yet occupied,
So it's occupied,
fully leased.
fully leased,
You're right.
and presumably.
I think they're
not
pretty much
completely
all in now.
occupied Very
Yeah.
soon, but you don't lease an apartment, a brand new apartment and not move in for you.
That's the news I was given
So
by
I'm
the owner.
Just
on
saying,
Friday.
to let the dust settle a little bit on all these new people and new cars and see how it feels. I'm not too sympathetic to the issue about sitting in your car at 4:30 in the afternoon to get through Pleasantville. That happens. I think, as Peter says, it's the way we live. It's not the town we live in. We all drive more places, and I think that's an argument for part of building a resilient community is housing near transit. So to the degree that we can create a slightly denser downtown, and we're talking slightly, I think, and a more vibrant commercial district, a more walking community, hopefully some of Jonathan's problems getting across town by car will be lessened.
Not just my problem.
No, a lot of people complain about it. My own husband complains to me about it. I tell him to shut up, but.
I have a feeling that's where this is
But-
going.
Pastor could not say, shut up. So,
Have you walked
But we
around
don't-
the village?
we all spend more time in our cars. It's not a great thing about our lives. And,
Just saying, I walked here today.
and if it causes some of us to say, you know what? It'll take me 3 minutes less in my car, but it's gonna be an unpleasant 3 minutes because I'm gonna be sitting on Bedford Road near Holy Innocents grinding my teeth. I'm just gonna walk. You know, for me, that would be a great thing. So maybe some of that can happen. It's an awfully dense downtown. There are an awful lot of people who live within walking distance of a lot of things. You're not, you know, if your soccer practice is in Armonk, it's not gonna help you. But
Could I jump in on the
But
traffic?
if you're taking your car through downtown, maybe your business is in downtown. If your business in downtown, maybe you could walk. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. Just to jump in quickly on the traffic, we had a work session about traffic last fall and compiled a very large list of our causes, very few of which we can do anything about, to your point. And you know, one of the big aspects that we talked about in general, there are a few east-west thoroughfares through Westchester, period. So most of those cars are not people who live in Pleasantville, who are coming through town in between a relatively isolated traffic problem. I would say it's roughly 3:30 to 5 or maybe 5:30, but it's relatively short-lived. And then one burst, because our three schools are all on the same block.
Right.
Basically,
Exactly.
right?
You
So we have
live-
we have that in the morning as well, but most of it is the way we live. We have, you know, we're talking a lot about transit-oriented development, but Memorial Plaza is basically empty of people parking their cars to take the train in New York City 3 to 5 days a week. You know, it's maybe got 20 cars in it, in the morning, whereas it used to be full and I couldn't get a permit for many, many years as a train commuter. So we have increased work from home. We have increased popularity of our own businesses, right? We have 15 or so restaurants that people want to come to. We have all of our increased personal car use during the day. And then I think the biggest issue that no one wants to admit is how we manage our own kids, and how we deal with them. And so everyone who has kids in American suburban activities is part of the problem, traffic problem. When I go to, I'll speak for myself, when I go to pick up kids at Briar Cliffs Taekwondo after school, guess what? It's like 50 Pleasantville people that I see because they have this well-written.
Can you vote for getting rid of all the after-school activities?
Let's see, 50 of those cars at 4:30 on our road are people going to get their kids at Briar Cliff. Honestly, you know, and so you just kind of add all of this up, and like you say, maybe they're going to soccer.
Kids in Briarcliff
because there isn't something like that here.
Put together a carpooling.
Well, they already have they have a van from school, yeah.
All the
The Nancy's-
parents are coming to Breaking Ground dance.
They have- Yeah, we're art stage. Yeah, we're art stages.
All the kids from Chapel.
All of that kind of stuff. So we have all this back and forth, but we also have idling delivery vehicles because of e-com. So we order things online, and Bedford is full
Right.
of delivery vehicles that have nowhere else to go, and they idle and get their package, And so I guess, we're just all a part of this. I just want to affirm your point
Yeah.
that government can't do.
And we're home more during
About
the day,
that.
probably more of us are driving to pick up our lunch
Because we're working from home,
takeout,
right?
because we're working from home.
And so our
and
restaurants
we're
are
getting
doing-
Amazon.
Restaurants are doing well during the day when they might not have been pre-COVID because of that. Because people are like, oh, I can just take a quick pop down to town, as get my lunch. But the Sawmill project has relieved a major source of our traffic. That people were diverting through town when that was under construction for 2 years.
Right, right.
So we saw an immediate relief there. And once Manville Road and Memorial Plaza and Cooley Street are done with, that's three more relief valves being opened up. So I've been saying wait and see a lot to everyone that I talk to, because for all of us too, we're waiting and seeing, right? We have models on a PDF, but we don't really know what it's gonna feel like when Cooley's a two-way street, when Memorial Plaza is fully redesigned and open, and when Manville's fully done. But we'll know pretty darn soon what the flow of cars feels like.
Well, some of what you were saying brings to my biggest overall point is about what we can't control and accepting that the future brings change, right? So the biggest argument seems to be, I want Pleasantville to be exactly like it's always been, whether I bought my house 6 years ago, or I have been living here for 50 years, my parents were born here, or everyone has a slightly different, dream about it. But in a way it is a dream, because, the future is coming, it's here. The sky is dark with dust.
It's not looking pretty.
There's an apocalypse happening outside our window. But so I find it unrealistic and a little bit self-indulgent to say, well, I want what I want and it shouldn't ever change, because you could drive around in your 1980 Chevy Impala and say, it's the car I like, and it's the only car I'm comfortable in, it's what I know and it's what I love, and I'm keeping it. And its mileage is way below anything that the federal government mandated, probably even in the 90s. It's got no catalytic converter. There are all kinds of reasons not to. And sometimes you can't get what you want. And there's a housing crisis, and a little bit more density in what's really a very limited downtown area seems to me like a good way for Pleasantville to participate in the future in a good way, in a reasoned way. By definition, these places are a little bit more affordable to live in than a house with a yard and 5 bedrooms. So it does bring in a slight mix of ages and economic levels and things like that. It's not affordable housing, sure. On the question of affordable housing, I was wondering, there was mention in the report of a village-owned property. Is that on Cooley Street? Which, not sure what it is.
Washington.
And a project
So
on a village-owned plan.
No, you're totally talking about the lane lot.
The Washington Avenue.
That's
the
not
county
village
one?
owned though.
There was reference
we
in
own
the
the property.
report to a
She's
village.
talking about the lane lot.
Oh, the lane lot, okay.
But
So the lane lot is the parking lot that's behind the post office building right now.
okay.
So-
The lane lot, because it was the site of Lane Plumbing.
Oh,
Right,
right,
yeah.
of course, okay.
So there had
I've only
been,
been here 19 years, but I don't know, like.
there had been a conversation about the possibility of an office building on that site with some parking that the village we would basically retain the parking spots, but that was
Okay.
suspended.
So related to that, maybe it's a crazy idea, but is it possible for the village to invite a developer of affordable housing to produce a project, maybe on land where we control? Now, I know somebody whose business is developing affordable housing. So obviously the developer who looks for a smaller profit margin, but gets things built. And perhaps they know other sources of funding. I imagine they usually work with community housing organizations. There's something called Westchester Residential Opportunities that, raises money for and works on affordable housing options for people in Westchester. A developer like that, would they not know how to make a project happen? And would they be interested? I don't know. This is the one I know based in New York City. Maybe this is too far away for them, but
Well, there are a lot of templates for that, and the issue about the lane lot, the proposal was that we sell that lot to the developer who's doing 70 Memorial, and we would get for it almost what we paid for it. And he would build a 4-story building, the first floor of which would be parking, which he would give us back. And that he would commit to the top 3 floors being office, not residential, because there's some synergy there. This would require a parking variance to allow him to valet park in his garage under the new building. But so the advantages there were village gets back most of what it invested in this property, even though we've used it all these many years, and we keep the parking. And we get a tax rateable for an office building.
right.
And
And we don't get new people in the schools. And
right. And so speaking for myself, one of the concerns that I think all of us likely have, consciously or not, is that we're kind of looking at a world where as the years pass, there are likely to be more people living in Pleasantville and fewer people working in Pleasantville. And that is very much different from the way it existed in the relatively recent past, including an environment where people assume it's a bedroom community for New York City, fewer than, I think, round figures, something like a third of the working population in Pleasantville commuted to the city. And now obviously even lower. So all those things come into play, but the idea, for example, of we could offer any village-owned property, the lane lot is one example, to an affordable developer. And there are a bunch of templates for it, including what happened, for example, at Reader's Digest when the Cupola building turned into mostly affordable housing. Wilder Bulge developed that, longstanding, a good developer. But the reason it happened is that there was all this other money being generated by Whole Foods and the retail and the townhouses that are now being built. And as part of the sort of quid pro quo to all of that, that building was made available for affordable. So essentially, like if we wanted to have affordable housing in the lane lot, I think it would be, certainly we would lose the parking and not get any back. And secondly, we would likely have to subsidize the purchase with a very low purchase price. All of those things are things that could be considered to do, but which are
they cost the village money.
well, and
We
I
sell
mean,
it at a loss.
in little ways, and I don't mean to suggest that I would never argue for this, because I very well could, but they make it more expensive in incremental ways for everyone else who lives here, because we are all collectively paying for it.
So one incremental change that I don't think anyone's brought up on this point of affordable housing. When BFJ was talking, when we were talking about affordable, and they were talking about New Jersey, and then New Jersey's tendency to have higher percentages of affordable housing required than New York. In the reading that I did, I also noticed that some of the towns do affordable housing. I think they call it a zoning overlay, where if a developer agrees to a higher percentage of affordable housing, then they are allowed to have more density. So the zoning density is X if you're at 10% affordable, but if you're at 15% affordable, the zoning is a little bit more than X. The density is different. And that's a sort of, it's really relatively small change, and it's giving the developer their
It
own.
sounds like that would really, get people's hackles up since density is already the big bugaboo.
Well, right, but I'm responding to your question about affordable. I don't know that there are many ways to get more affordable housing without more density. I guess I don't know what they would be.
Well, I think
I guess unless there's significant government subsidies to make it,
Yeah,
to repay the developer for building it and then maintain it somehow at cost.
There have been some, I mean, and I don't know a lot about this, but there have been some interesting projects within Westchester County. Affordable housing projects that are more targeted. So I'm forgetting which town it was now, but there's a development recently that was targeted towards emergency like EMS and firefighters and so on. So there are all kinds of interesting things going on in that sphere.
Although in New York State, maybe different elsewhere, especially if there's any public funding involved at a state or federal level, they pretty well eliminated the possibility of local preferences. Years back, you know, for example, the senior housing gets developed, Pleasantville residents had preference that is no longer an option available. I mean, we have, you know, a template that still exists. Our Ashburn Hall, Clinton Street Center, on the corner of Wheeler and Clinton, was built now 20 years ago. And there are 24 apartments upstairs, all affordable at several different levels of the percentage of the average median income, all required to meet affordability requirements and age requirements. And it's been a very, very successful building over many years. It was achieved in a complicated way. I've been on the board of Pleasantville Housing Development Fund Corporation since the beginning of that. And the village contributed a big piece of land that it had that once was a parking lot, not big, I don't know, 14 cars or something, contributed that land for free. The county threw quite a bit of money into it in an outright grant. And then the mortgages for it were written through a social investment corporation, a piece of Chase Manhattan that bundles these things and sells them as tax credits to wealthy people who can take advantage of them. The result of all of this is that there was a 15-year period when the stack of paperwork that went into creating this was, I mean, literally this high, and the tax returns every year for a not-for-profit were literally this high, because every year you're demonstrating the imputed income, and there are these balloon mortgages and and then it took a solid 2 or 3 years of work to unwind it at the conclusion of 15 years, which is when the tax credits ended. And one of the games there in other places is to syndicate again for a new round of tax credits, which is often done in a circumstance where a building needs a big investment or something of that kind. It wasn't the case here, but I will say the whole process of that project over a 15-year period was really, really, really daunting. Oh my God. You know,
But I bet everyone loves that we have, that's something about.
It is great, yeah.
I don't in any way,
I've always been impressed, I
Right.
always wondered how it was funded, I
Yeah.
never knew.
I don't in any way regret that we did it, but I can tell you there are, you know, over a period of years, you know, there are a bunch of board members been on since the beginning, but there are 15 people that kind of put their head on the table and say, I just can't do this another year, right?
No.
It isn't that even heavy lifting, it's just so tangled and so
Right.
elaborate.
So here's another potentially unpopular suggestion, but the Methodist church site, which you were talking about, I did want to say something about that senior assisted living project that was scuttled, as it was mentioned. My impression, I may be wrong, my recollection is it was Sunrise, or one of those huge
Sunrise was the second player, the first was Benchmark.
right? National assisted living for-profit places. Those are not inexpensive places to live, in my experience. So
No doubt.
it might enable you to help a parent move within Pleasantville, stay there, but at pretty great cost, because I've worked on moving elderly relatives on pensions, for instance, into assisted living, and it's a high, base rent that you pay before you get a lot of services. The idea is supposed to be that you can stay as you get sicker and older, but it gets a lot more expensive the sicker and older you get. So that, I think, shouldn't go into on the column side of, but this was a way for seniors to stay in Pleasantville and meet government, because I think that's a very different kind of profile than what David is thinking when he's talking about how can our,
Yeah, I mean, the
citizens-
senior assisted living piece is an extraordinarily difficult thing where there isn't any inexpensive way to manage the care of someone who
Right, 'cause
needs,
there's care
ongoing
built in
care,
that makes it expensive.
right, so,
There's a whole economics to that is way beyond the discussion of this meeting tonight, which Claire is right, it's expensive, but it's expensive over a fairly short period of time, funded usually by the economics of selling a home. So it for the vast majority of people, it is manageable. I'm not taking away from the cost, but the average stay at the assisted living homes that were being discussed at the time was 2 years. So
right, or less.
Funded with one.
Yeah, exactly.
He
So-
speaks as a former advocate for Sunrise, so.
Still, what I want to say,
Yeah,
is,
benchmark.
I know that the church still has that property, and I know they have an idea for developing houses that I think would be within zoning as of right for youth with developmental issues for.
Yeah, so I think, again,
I don't know if there's a way to
it's,
partner with
it's
them,
outside the reach of this immediate discussion, but
make it
there have been
easier
some
for them.
changes in the lay of the land with that as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
but maybe
But,
there's a.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a very
concept
serious
where
need too.
Maybe it's a mixed community. You have older people, you have younger people. The older people need a certain kind of, have a certain kind of need. These younger people, as I understand, a different kind of need, but it's a lot of land with an organization that wants to do good with it. Maybe there's good to be done.
I just want to bring it back to the discussion though, because certainly, Claire, there is a section of the community that says no change, I don't want any change. I'm not talking to a lot of those folks. I see them more on Facebook than I do. They come up to me and say, whatever. I think the vast majority of people that I talk to anyway understand that we do need to change. I think the question though is because the physical infrastructure of Pleasantville doesn't change. You can't change the roads. You're going to have a hard time changing our emergency services. Yes, I know that the study said that it's a fairly de minimis impact for the 50 to 60 new build apartments that they think could be developed in the next 10 years. But when you consider that, and I'm talking about the fire department, the ambulance corps has already gone to paid during the day. The fire department, my understanding is now that truck goes out, it's extraordinarily rare that fire department's trucks go out fully manned. So the trucks are going out with half crews on them. And so the question to the community is how much additional pressure do we want to keep putting onto a system that is already not performing
Okay, so,
at the level that it's been recommended that they.
okay, so there's a serious conversation to be had in lots of places in our world. Certainly in Westchester, about whether volunteer services like fire departments are long-term viable. And at a scale of concern that is different from what it was a generation ago. However, I think it's also clear that the kinds of things that we're talking about here are new buildings built to current fire code, sprinklers, the whole 9 yards. All those things are positive. That doesn't mean there couldn't be a call for sure. But where does your argument go? I mean, if your argument is we need to organize our lives around potentially reducing the demand for a fire call, then there are all kinds of things we should do, including not allow people to expand their houses, all kinds of stuff, right?
Well, so I mean, and that is a I think that's sort of a stalking or what do they call it, gaslighting question. I don't know.
Well, why is that a gaslighting
Well,
question?
because I think the better question is what do we do manage the process so that it can catch up, or that we can, parallel process, the issue on the other side, find out what the fire department's goals are. Are there shared services that a different way of looking at sharing the volunteer services with the town and neighboring communities, so that, because they're all not going out at the same time, but they still have this,
I mean,
there's this massive
a
volunteers
huge
within
amount of
5 miles.
there's a huge amount of mutual aid going on.
You're not wrong.
There is, but it's not as organized as maybe it could be, or maybe it is. I don't know. I'm just saying that.
It's pretty well organized. I mean, these
I'm just
guys
saying that
are
there is
really impressive.
just because there isn't a solution to that problem doesn't make it, in my opinion, any less reasonable to say, well, should we be contributing to the problem further? And until
Sorry, is this, I'm not sure I completely understand, because I totally get, you're absolutely right. There's a significant issue about, volunteer fire departments and the lack of volunteers. And I would argue that also has to do with affordability, because the people
For
who
sure.
move here do not have the kind of time
It needs
to
to be a family affair.
volunteer, right? Yeah, so all the problems you would solve with affordability, but needless to say, however, I don't get the argument that we should stop development in the village because it's somehow the straw that breaks the camel's back, when you're talking about large, centrally located, fully monitored, sprinklered apartments that are generally occupied by people in reasonable health. That's not the profile of something that actually creates large demand on emergency services.
Yeah,
I mean, the only thing I'll say is I have no expert in this area,
Yeah.
except to say that the more pressure you put on, more calls for the fact that they are not manned as fully as we would like them to be, the greater opportunities for something to happen, the more apartments you add to the complex, the more expanded houses, however you want to characterize it, adds additional pressure on.
So I'm not even sure.
job.
Look, it's not that there isn't a train of thought there that's valid, but again, having not intended to support or deny 444 Bedford Road, I am guessing that 444 Bedford Road, in its completely renovated and expanded condition proposed by the current developer, represents a pretty significantly safer building with a pretty significantly lower risk of a fire response and a pretty significantly easier fire response, if there was one, than the building we have today.
Right. Except that if they have a toaster oven that goes on fire in there and the fire department has to go, and then you have a major structural fire, somewhere else in the village at the same time, you don't have the personnel.
All true, but what do you do about that? You outlaw toasters? I mean,
A toaster oven in
What do you do
one of
about
these
that?
apartment buildings sets off the sprinkler system.
I would like nothing better.
Yeah, they'll still respond though, David.
I would like,
They're not gonna
I
respond
would
to
like
7
nothing
trucks.
better than to reduce the impacts on dedicated volunteers like the fire department. I don't see you can identify certain things that are a significant stressor to the fire department, and one of them is false alarms.
Correct.
More people have fire alarms go off, nothing's wrong, somebody, there's a gas leak, or, all those things that they respond to all the time.
Yeah.
The sort of cats and dogs sort of stuff, where, you get out of bed in the middle of the night, you run down, you put on the stuff, the truck comes out, it's a false alarm. Obviously, those are things you want to reduce as much as you possibly can. But I mean, you look at the call statistics, they're all in the BFJ report, and there are up years, down years, same with our police department, up years, down years, that are largely not easily definable by, the population grew, these things grew. Same with the school district. Why in 2009 were we 250 kids higher than we are now 14 years later? Right? I mean, that's.
Again, you're referencing
but
the
you're
entire enrollment of the school, and as opposed to if those kids went into one, but.
Okay, but Jonathan,
But if you're really serious
we got
about
3
the-
schools. If there are 250 more kids and they're evenly divided, that's like 80 kids in each school, right? I'm not encouraging higher enrollment. I just,
But if we're really serious about the emergency response issue, this is not the play, look, there's a table 11 in our report, shows the percentage of calls and the growth of calls to multifamily units. That's not actually the problem in the village. We would look at, beyond what Peter already said, we would look at, maybe we should do code inspections on existing structures. Reducing those kinds of calls could actually be fruitful and would relieve the pressure on the fire department. I mean, that's where the calls are really going. If you're going to single family house.
that will be popular.
I know, obviously it's gonna be, but if you want to go, if you want to get people really
Bring back the
angry.
development.
All right.
No,
so-
and so anyway, look.
All right, we
I
cited
think
that Virgil a little
I'm
bit.
not afraid that-
Yes.
I don't think that, I don't know that the vast majority of the community is saying no change. I think, I mean, they're just, I think that, and I don't know, I'm in the same boat you are, I'm not talking to the entire community. The folks that I talk to, want to, would like to feel like it's being a little bit, is being managed more than it is sort of being, and understand that the impacts of increased density and where the chokeholds are and the experience, not necessarily the village's fault over the last couple of years, because it did coincide with the Sawmill River project and web road or parkway project, is that it just feels like it's tough to get into restaurants, it's tough to get around town, it's tough to, and all this stuff is going to make it more tough. The only other thing I want to bring up is I appreciate where you were going with the problem solving of this as a goal oriented. I began to hear some goals. David certainly got a goal of affordable, and
Mhm.
if you could define, and I know you can't, but density, and say, well, of that density, we'd like to see a larger portion of that density be affordable, not incremental. Not, we're gonna have this, and the only way we're gonna get affordable housing is to incrementally increase density. But and this may sound weird coming from me, given my position on things, but the tweaks that BFJ suggested to the zoning, first of all, first of all, I don't even understand what they are. FAR and this, that, and it's like, whatever, tell me what.
That's what he said as a board
Tell me
member.
what it's gonna do, tell me what it's gonna do to the overall density. But I've heard sort of consistently from that side of the table, and I pushed back, I haven't agreed with it entirely, that the advantage of having greater density in the downtown area is greater foot traffic for the retail businesses.
That's
And we're very
wonderful,
concerned
yeah.
about the retail fronts.
Mhm.
And so if that is, and I don't have to agree with you guys, but if that is the consensus of the board, then why aren't we looking at the zoning tweaks to eliminate or cut back on the need for development in the A1 district to have the lower floor be retail? It seems to me that we're just compounding the problem. If we're gonna add new development and that development has to come with retail, we're increasing the retail
Okay, so
stock
what?
in the village.
I don't think it
You want
necessarily-
apartments on the first one?
That,
Or just-
you guys are getting paid the big bucks on make those decisions. Not me. I'm just saying that
That's
it seems a bit inconsistent.
I'm not necessarily, I'm not sure that's necessarily how it works, right? Like,
It isn't?
no, like, it's not just like, what's the, in science class, where you learn about the diffusion of
Yeah.
particles or something like that. It's not like there's X amount of shoppers, and the more shops you have, the fewer shoppers you have to buy at those stores. I think it's much more complex than that.
Actually,
Like-
concentration create traffic.
I mean, I think if you have
Good foot
a more dynamic downtown
Yeah.
in general, and you have more foot traffic, you have a more vibrant commercial center, you
And
know.
people will come from other towns and then we'll have.
Yeah,
Which they're doing
I
now.
don't
We already
think
are
that
where they
makes sense.
consider.
Well, wait, we claim that.
I will say-
Right to be a magnet in some areas.
We want everything until we get it.
I honestly, there are a lot of issues around retail, and that's something that I'm looking into right now. There was a very interesting presentation about supporting retail at the NICOM conference. And, so just to let you know, like, I'm trying to convene a bunch of stakeholders and sort of look into that a lot more. But I think that's a pretty complex issue. And I don't buy the argument that if you have more stores, that's going to be worse for the existing stores. I really.
Just like I don't buy the argument that if you have more people, it's necessarily better or worse for the stores, but.
But hold it, just back to your original point. Our zoning currently says you have to have a commercial use on the first floor.
Correct.
And if we didn't say that.
Yeah.
And your argument is perhaps we shouldn't say that. What is it that you would hope would be on the first floor?
Well, and I appreciate the effort to turn the table on me.
Jonathan, I'm not turning the table. You said you can't throw out there the idea that we shouldn't require retail because we have empty stores.
I am going from the premise that what I've heard from the board is a desire to have greater density in the downtown area to support existing retail, that there are storefronts in the village that are vacant.
Okay, so you accused me. I've asked you a
I'm not
perfectly reasonable.
accusing.
No, hold it. I asked you a perfectly reasonable question, the logical question that would follow to your proposal. But let me take it back and say, okay, here's what I think. I think that an interesting downtown where people want to be requires a sequence of things that people are interested in. Stores, restaurants, services.
Right.
When you walk past potentially office after office after office, and we have offices on the first floor, it doesn't contribute to the life of that community. I had someone say to me the other day that they thought a parcel was empty, that no, it's not empty, it's an office. So, the reality there is that, as everyone else has said, people are drawn to places that are lively and interesting. You know, look at Greenwich Village. I think that's what's going on in Tarrytown. Tarrytown has all kinds of interesting things going on. The parking sucks. It makes parking look great in Pleasantville, but people are happy to go there because it's an interesting place to be, right? So
And Pleasantville isn't.
I think it is. But if we started to say, okay, you don't have to have commercial on the first floor. I mean, 70 Memorial has commercial space on the first floor. I do not believe that space will go wanting in the long term. He's picky about who will occupy it, but I can tell you for certainty, there are people knocking on his door interested in it. And when that is occupied, that piece of Memorial Plaza is going to be better than it has been in anybody's lifetime. Me speaking, suddenly what was a completely moribund, crappy streetscape is going to be a beautiful sidewalk with a number of storefronts with likely interesting things going on. Even if they're not of interest to a specific person, the liveliness of the community is going to change in better ways. Instead of arriving in Memorial Plaza and parking and saying, okay, I don't see anything good going on. There's a diner in the corner, I could go there. Everything else is closed. But I know that this is a parking lot, and if I walk around, I'll find something. No, we're going to arrive at a place where it starts to feel more alive and connect the two sides of the village. Likewise, exactly the same circumstance here with our improvements along Manville Road. For my entire life in public service, yours too probably, the consistent complaint to me was, oh my God, it's just a mess. Crossing Manville, it's too wide. On a rainy, dark night, someone's going to get hit. You got these diagonal crosswalks. This is completely sucks. Now we're changing that, have already changed that significant piece of it. It's not done yet. The crosswalks haven't been restriped and all of that. But we've achieved what I think is the right bargain for all of these challenges. And everything I hear is, oh my God, well, but I can't make a right on red. I can't get around this on the car. What if I used to double park in front of, okay, I get it. That's, you get shaken out of your past practice. But in the end, what's going to happen is you say manage development. You manage development with the things you control, and that's what we've done. You don't manage when Chase moves and causes an economic problem, or a property owner decides they're up in years, it's time to sell, or some business retires or Pleasantville Pharmacy says, had enough of trying to fight the big guys. All these things, regrettable things that I really wish wouldn't happen, not because we did anything. And so, you said harder to get into restaurants. That's an interesting conversation where there is no restaurant and no store that says there are too many people here. There is no restaurant that will say, Jonathan Cunningham, I completely agree. I wish I had fewer patrons so that whenever you walk in, I have a table.
I'm not talking from a perspective of the restaurant owner.
Well, that we are, to the extent that we represent them too.
Well, I will just add about the foot traffic issue. It's not just us saying that. Like, there's a lot of research supporting the idea that if you want to have a vibrant commercial district, it helps to have more foot traffic. And in particular, what's interesting about this mixed use type of development too, is really it's going back to an older model. So we've been talking a lot tonight about the idea that everything's changing in the world and that makes everybody uncomfortable. And I think that's true, honestly, for everyone, in some ways, right? But this particular example of like mixed use development where you have some commercial and some residential is in a way going back to an older model, right? Of cities before, the 50s and the 60s, when you had this big push towards a separating of those two. And there's been a recognition and a lot of research to support this, that especially given all of the stresses that all of the competition that retail faces, that if you do want to have that kind of vibrant downtown, it helps to have those together.
Right, and not to be confused with being the devil's advocate, because that's kind of the position I was trying to take. I do not.
That's okay.
I don't want to see. I think mixed use is a more viable solution,
Mhm.
but I also don't agree with the idea that we need to have greater density in the village to have a successful retail area. I'm not sure that that's what's going on right now. The Pleasantville Pharmacy, I'm told, and nobody's refuted it, I've tried to get the right answer. They're looking for $14,000 a month to rent the pharmacy. I don't know who the heck can do retail in Pleasantville at $14,000 a month.
And so, look,
I know. Just let me
again,
finish.
it's
But my only point is, I don't know how much and I've said this to you guys before, how much the veto is holding out for the right guy, how much retail is holding out for these changes to happen and people move in. And so they're keeping their rents high with the anticipation that, hey, guess what? The village is going to drive more people through here, and I'll get somebody to come in and pay my rent, the rent I want, as opposed to locking in a 5-year lease at $8,000 for the pharmacy and have a tenant today. I don't know what's going on.
So,
Well, how do you, let me ask Jonathan a question. So how do you see that potentially playing out in the long run? Because, I'm not an economist, but my guess is, I have concerns about things like that too, but my guess is that like market forces will eventually make that even out, right? Like it's not going to be to the benefit of the owner of the building to hold that space vacant indefinitely, right? So at a certain point,
my feeling is, after having years of experience with this village and watching there be far more empty storefronts in the past than there are now, in far worse economic conditions, that's exactly what will happen.
Yeah.
That there will be some move to equilibrium on rents, and that you'll see that those storefronts do fill, albeit probably lower rent prices. In the future, I think there's a real economic incentive right now for both the new buildings and you're seeing it in new buildings and some of the existing storefronts that are empty, to hold out for a while and to kind of see where things go.
just like a homeowner trying to sell their house, waiting for the moment. I mean, there's nothing that we should be doing about that. That's the way the system works.
But
no, I don't think he's saying there is.
Including necessarily feeling like we need to significantly increase density to bail out.
No.
But to help retail.
Yeah, no, that's
it's
not
it's a virtuous cycle. This is the issue, right? Because our costs, tell me if I'm wrong, Eric, I think went up about 7 or 7.5% last year. Our taxes went up a little bit over 2%. then that's gonna happen every year.
Correct.
Unless you want your taxes to go up 7% every year, the money has to come from somewhere, right? And so it could come from all of the single family houses getting more expensive and us reassessing them, that's a possibility. Or it has to come from some kind of development. The development has an added benefit that we're getting more in tax revenue from sales tax as well, right? So if you want retail to survive, retail is a really tricky question right now because Amazon has, Walmart ate the lunch of all the local retailers and then Amazon ate Walmart's lunch and now there's really nobody standing. And the only time people actually want to shop at retail is when it is significantly more convenient than Amazon. Who does that apply to? It applies to people who are within a block of the retail store that you're looking at. So you put in 100 people a block away from, 10 retail stores, and those stores could survive. Whereas before those people, they would not have. And I do think that is part of what's going. People are potentially waiting to see that traffic come because that's going to change the economics of storefronts in the village for the positive of everyone. And the idea that, having a first floor at 70 Memorial is somehow taking away from the village, I think is crazy unless they were only putting a first floor, not the 3 stories of apartments above it with consumers in them. You see what I'm saying?
But I think part of what you're asking about is capacity. Like, I think part of what you're asking about is like, where do we reach a point where it feels like enough? I'm at least that's partly what I'm hearing in your question.
Well, yeah. I think I'll clarify that for a second.
Yeah.
So David, I agree with the virtual circle to a degree. You guys ran a $250,000 overtime budget on police last year. I mean, so you're gonna have to probably hire, my guess is, at some point, you're probably gonna contemplate hiring additional police.
So
officers.
that's not the analysis that we have before us. The $250,000 overtime had nothing to do with a growth in the number of calls. There were fewer calls than in some previous years.
So my point is that to the degree that some of this development tips the scale on some of those economics, that it takes, so maybe you're gonna get what, $60,000, $70,000 from 70 Memorial for the village? I mean, roughly speaking, that's the tax benefit to the village.
I mean, when you look at the overall tax benefit to our residents, it's the school taxes and.
Well, that you're using the school too. I'm just saying.
Right. Kind of important.
Yeah, but we don't pay police out of the school budget. We pay police out of.
Look, you can think whatever you think. There is no data, and we have shown you the data that suggests that our police overtime budget last year is going to be bigger in the future because of this development. None, zero. The data does not support that. You look at the number of calls, they're up some years, down other years. When we have a down year, it doesn't change the police budget. The overtime budget is based on a whole series of factors, which you and I suffered with together for all the years you were on the board. Very difficult thing to manage. But we diverge and probably we need to just bring this to some sort of a conclusion. Let me just say one thing, which is the painful double bind that all of these things reflect, which is the best thing that happened to parking on Wheeler Avenue is the pharmacy went out of business. That's the best thing that happened for parking on Wheeler Avenue. And it's the worst thing that happened on Wheeler Avenue at the same time, right? It can't be if we had
parking gotten better on Wheeler Avenue.
Well, so it quickly gets sucked up by other people who see opportunities now,
right,
because there were more opportunities, and so it fills up. It's like traffic, same story. Like
right,
if we squelched off development in the idea that we're trying to make it easier for people to go from Briarcliff to Armonk, we'll get more of them because it's easier to do.
Mhm.
What we've done on Manville Road, very careful, very thoughtful, very analyzed route. It's not going to create a 5-star disaster, but what we're trying to say is, guess what? Manville Road,
15 years in the making.
yes, Manville Road is not a raceway, and
Correct.
suck it up, right? So I'm happy about that. That said, it's like, whoa, hold it, I used to do this. So.
Well, I appreciate
Yes.
this discussion, honestly,
And I appreciate you, both of you, for,
right. This is kind of where the rubber meets the road on this whole analysis. I think as we're all realizing, it's pretty damn complicated.
that's true.
And there are,
That is
and I would urge you guys to go back to kind of where you were heading, and that is sort of the goals based. I mean, I don't know about, I mean, how you get more affordable. I'd like to see more affordable housing. I do think that it talk about a virtual circle. I do think that it creates mini virtual circles.
No doubt.
From everything from volunteerism in the community to, a better and more diverse community. I think there's a whole bunch of benefits to it. I don't know how you get there. Again, you talk about complicated, it even gets more complicated, but
Yeah. I mean, the only way to get there at the moment, I don't doubt that there are some outlying issues, but the way to get there at the moment and the way that this has existed is to subsidize it.
Right.
Public subsidy, tax money, property tax money, payment in lieu of taxes, loss of revenue for a property owner who owns it. Those are the levers. So, same story, single family homeowners are not by and large saying, I'll sell my house for 2/3 of what I could get because I would like to make it more affordable to somebody else. I mentioned somebody has done it, but not too many, right?
Ooh. But anyway, so it's interesting that Atwood's open, or at least as leased. We'll see as it gets filled.
Mhm.
The impacts, and certainly I agree with Claire. The more time that we can get it within the moratorium, and I know that's not exactly what the moratorium is for, but there are lots of issues yet have to be studied, that we can begin to get a feel for what the impact of having 70 Wheeler come online will, I think, serve to further clarify your goal-based discussion in terms of where things should go.
At the price of, the one looming example is the owners of 444 Bedford Road.
Right.
So.
And
Well, plus, I mean, realistically, Wheeler, if you're talking about it being occupied and us seeing the results of that, I think you're talking about next year for it to be really occupied and for us to actually,
Wheeler.
sorry, 70 Memorial.
oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, based on his other property and how long it took him to do the finishing touches and get people in there.
Well, there's an issue with Cooley Street too and the permits, which just means that it's gonna take longer for that.
So that would mean a full
Wow.
year extension to the moratorium. I just don't know what the
Yeah.
legal basis for that would be.
Yeah, and I do not. I have some empathy for the folks at 444, and and if that's the one thing that is holding it up, perhaps there's other solutions there that could be contemplated. But anyway, those were my initial thoughts. And thanks for this is the part of the discussion that the last 4 months have generated. So I appreciate that.
And I thank you for both of you for coming.
Well, there's gonna be more. I mean, obviously you're gonna have to,
That's what we have to
or
talk,
not.
one of the things we need to talk
Jonathan
about.
and I should unionize, because there are 5 of you and
Oh, no, you want more people, we can get more people.
Jonathan is legion.
Except I don't think you'd want to be in the same union exactly there. It's a big tent union, big tent. How about it could be the Union of Concerned Pleasantville Residents? I'll join that.
Exactly. That's what we're all in.
I also think looking at it from a legal standpoint, when we were challenged for the exception, I think that our reasoning to not accept the exception on Bedford Road here, it was difficult to be able to give that decision. That now, if let's say we were to try to extend it again, we have the studies now. So if I'm looking at it from the other side, if I'm a developer and I'm gonna attack the village on the legal aspect of it, I'm gonna use our own data that we have now, and use it against us. And say, you have it, your whole purpose of the moratorium is for this, you have all of that, so why are you stopping me now? So that's another thing, think about it in a legal standpoint, that we have to look at the interest of the village as well.
Well, yeah, and I don't disagree with you, Paul, except I think this, this discussion's recorded and I think you can play that back and say, hey, look, there are a lot of questions still about, yeah, it's raw data, but what's the interpretation and what are some of the conclusions that we can make from that still? So
Those probably favor the developers, if you think about it, a lot.
well,
And that's
the
what
other
I'm
thing
looking at.
the other thing you do is take the data and go, okay, well, that's 36 apartments. And I'm not saying you do this, I don't even want to say anything out loud, but you could create, you could ask them to resubmit their waiver, and consider it under, the discussions that you've had now, without extending the moratorium.
So, I mean, just for starters, anything could happen if the moratorium expires and no longer is in extant, presumably 444 Bedford proceeds.
Yeah,
Your scenario was to find a way to allow them to proceed without lifting the moratorium.
right.
Anything could happen tomorrow. Obviously, we have no knowledge of it, but I can say we have no knowledge
Right.
of any significant undertaking that would be a significant increase in residential development anywhere else.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it couldn't appear, but it's not like we're sitting on top of, oh, well, I understand this is going to happen and that's going to happen, and they're all waiting for this.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so,
Can I make a comment about goals, Jonathan?
sure.
So I'm a historian, I love history, and I've read all the old master plans. And something that stuck with me in my limited time here on the board is how much the goals of the 1995 master plan are being enacted now, 30 years later. And so I want to bring that up to say that most of what is being enacted in the central business district is not, doesn't feel to me like the product of these few people, but it feels like a long hoped for culmination, actually. So just to read a couple of their goals from 1995, they wanted to integrate the separate retail areas of the central business district. So
Say again, Dave.
integrate the separate retail areas.
I believe Dan Sweeney may have been the chair.
To integrate, so the Manville Road project, the pedestrian project, helps the Washington retail district feel more connected and be more connected to Wheeler and to Memorial Plaza and beyond. With the connection through to Cooley Street, we're fulfilling one of their goals of not having the train tracks be such a bifurcating division of the village, so that people feel like the west side of Memorial Plaza is somewhere that they want to go, and that they want to spend their money as consumers, maybe that they even want to live. Another one of their goals is create a central focus that is more than a commuter parking lot. But they don't want that for their village, and that's obviously
There's some genius.
a long-running idea. They also want to ensure adequate short-term parking for shoppers, which one of the only good things that come out of COVID was that we were able to do that, to convert Memorial Plaza to short-term parking. All of a sudden, we have a chance to do this now because there are no commuters there and they haven't returned in the numbers that they were at before. There's other things about beautification and landscaping, which we've enacted, especially in pedestrian areas. Anyway, it goes on, including talking about encouraging retail and service uses on the first floor of all downtown buildings, rather than office uses. So I'm very comforted by this. That's why I open it periodically when I feel like, why are we doing what we're doing? And honestly, it even goes back to the 1960s master plan. They complain about parking and they complain about traffic, and they want the west side of Memorial Plaza to be developed.
So
In the 1960s, that's what they're saying, because it felt separate, And I just walked past the Cooley Street pedestrian walkthrough, just look at it today, and I think something they wanted in 1965 is actually happening.
Yeah.
No, and I
60
don't
years
disagree
later.
with you. My only observation is that those are the goals that every master plan update that I worked on, and I hate all of them because there is outdated the moment you sign them in as.
But those aren't outdated goals.
But for that reason alone, because it's a repetition of a lot of the same goals. When we worked on Marble Avenue corridor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead and read that.
I
I bet
read
you
it.
there's a lot of the same goals in there.
Okay, but
Reconnect that
Jonathan,
part of
I
the
mean,
village
you
to-
say it seems motherhood and apple pie. I can tell you, I say with some pride, you know, we did this new planting bed. Now have the angled parking on both sides, and you know, I rushed right out there, watched them put the dirt in, and just you wait until you see Wagner Hodgins planting plan and the 2 trees that are going to go in there, and you see that, and you see the streetscape we're about to get, and this walkway that, you know, like they can they find another inch to put any more plants in as you get your way down all the way to from Memorial Plaza Cooley, and I felt like, okay, it's happening. Right.
I'm not
So
criticizing. I'm really not.
Again, my point is, again, just my view of it, obviously, but I think Memorial Plaza is already looking that better than it has ever looked in the 30 some odd years I've lived here. And in the next year, it's really going to come together.
Mhm.
And a significant piece of that is these motherhood and apple pie goals that have made their way along. And, you know, this whole notion of closing the slip lane discussed all these years, the streetscape improvements that existed when you were on the board and previous. Finally, we found a way incrementally to make it happen.
And incremental is the right word.
And there is not an insignificant piece of what's happening there that was made possible by 70 Memorial, especially that walkway. I mean, like, I have pictures, like, imagine how many hundreds, thousands of times I've snaked my way past post office trucks and past the cars to get down to Cooley Street. It's a necessary interval of darkness to get what you want to have happen. And now, for the first time in our recorded history, it's going to be like a walk you might take just for the hell of it.
Yeah, it's gonna be really
And
great.
I'll leave you with this stuff. The function of government is best done incremental. I mean, that's almost the way it's built, is that, you know, things happen incrementally.
More than almost.
And I think what's going on with the development right now and where the reaction from the community is it feels wholesale. It doesn't feel.
Okay, but government didn't do that. The private market did that.
I would
Yeah.
argue that
Don't
government
disagree.
actually doesn't work incrementally, government plans incrementally. But then what happens is change often happens all at once.
But you haven't been behind that table long enough, David.
I think he's actually right.
What?
We plan
Things don't
incrementally.
happen fast in government.
No, I didn't say that. I said,
Okay.
we plan incrementally, we regulate incrementally.
Right.
But when change actually happens as a result of our planning, it often arrives all at once. I mean,
And you often wait years
Yeah,
for it to
That
arrive.
would be fair. That's
You
fair.
wait for
So,
it.
Bringing us back to the task at hand, just.
What is the
quickly.
task at hand?
I also want to show this.
Who are we?
2 minutes.
Oh, yeah, okay, well, why don't you do that first,
All
and
right.
then I will do
So
the task at hand bit.
well, let's move on. Thank you for that. Please stay.
So,
What are you doing now?
no, I just.
It's
I want-
related.
It's related.
Build this.
Yeah. I just
You
want
won't
to-
be bored.
May
You'll
I
be
share
worried.
my screen?
It's worth the ticket price.
I lost my Zoom
I'm not
connection.
saying that. May I share my screen?
You may, please do. I hope you will.
I'm gonna look over on your computer, because I
Okay.
lost my Zoom.
Meanwhile, Messi
So-
going to Miami.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Wait, what's happening?
Messi's going to play. for
Oh, I
Miami.
know, but I thought you were talking about the basketball team.
Who's winning Heat Nuggets? That's the question.
Yeah.
So for, so in short, I said earlier that, just to summarize something I've heard a lot, are people who feel like they don't want to be surrounded by buildings. The 4th story feels very imposing to some people. And generally there's concern about, if that sort of development were to keep going and keep going and keep going, what would the village center feel like? So one idea that, I'm proposing for discussion, you know, here, I've thought about it a good bit and done some research, but my board colleagues don't know much about it yet, is the idea of a special district relating to the proposed new civic space. So when we're in the civic space, when we're looking to the northwest and to the west and a little bit to the southwest, we see the horizon. We see a landscape. Obviously,
Just to say, this is a drone.
this is a drone.
Nobody has this view.
Everyone knows
Okay.
that. But that is the landscape to the west.
I just want to be clear, this isn't the view we're trying to protect, because nobody has this view.
Maybe the Memorial Plaza people have that view.
I think it was clear.
Okay.
It's my
Shooter right off of the
building.
Chase
Yeah.
building.
I'm very tall, but I do not take that. So here would be a photo in the winter, right,
Yeah.
for walking out of the train station.
So sad.
I know, it looks very sad. Here's a much nicer one. I didn't have Jonathan's skills to take it, but Jonathan Cunningham can provide you with some great photos from the center of a future civic space. Again, from that same spot, and just added one for Memorial Day. Just now, when the veterans were being greeted and thanked.
What's that color
at the
above the
end.
trees?
Certainly. That's right. This was this morning, so it's a little bit different. Three different views. So in some municipalities, including New York City, going back to 1974, there are zoning overlays that can be adopted to protect a view. Usually it's a view of a natural phenomenon. Sometimes it's a view of a built phenomenon, particular skyline, particular buildings. But it varies depending on where you go. I asked our BFJ planners about this in Westchester, and they said, yes, these are used sometimes, usually along the Hudson. But I thought, the view from a potential proposed civic space might be worth protecting. And so why? Well, I think having some kind of harmony between the built environment of the center of the village and the landscape horizon to the west is beneficial for people living here. I think people don't think about what would be lost if they never see the horizon from where they live. But it does have positive effects on can I say the soul? I said here, positive effects on the soul, on the spirit.
That's your business.
To be in some kind of relationship between natural environment and built environment. And of course, architects think and write about this sort of thing all the time.
The Japanese call it a borrowed landscape.
In their design, a borrowed landscape.
Yeah. Mhm.
So Michael, just to be clear, we're standing at the baseball diamond there. Home plate is the Memorial Plaza.
That is
Hopefully it would be the exit from the train station onto the new civic
I
space.
just picked a spot in the center of a proposed new civic space.
And so the one line going down towards the bottom goes through the diner, is that through the
Correct.
diner? And then, okay, got it. So we're looking that direction.
No, it's the line at the bottom is going through the post
We're looking
office.
west.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so the diner is in that window. These are just rough lines to give you the idea of they're called view sheds or view planes in urban planning and
Okay.
architecture. So what I think this would do, in addition to what I just said, is provide a dignified backdrop to the war monuments. Now, of course, right now you do not see many buildings behind them, but something we do in government is incremental regulation. As we think about the future, we think about what if some future board changes their zoning, and then you have a very large building that's
Also,
just immediately right
I
behind
mean,
there.
behind that view, if those trees weren't there, is the Burns Media Arts Lab and Lab Design.
One story, 3 stories.
Right, the Burns Media Arts Lab is built to the zoning max.
I'm not thinking
Land
at
is
all
2
about the
stories.
buildings that
Yep.
exist.
Well, I guess my question
I'm
is,
thinking about
like,
the
so,
future.
Do you want to let him
Okay.
finish and then come back to this? Because I think he's getting answers.
sorry, okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the future.
Okay.
So, so we have some towns in Westchester that bear some similarity to ours that have 6-story buildings. Bronxville, for example, has some 6-story buildings very close to the village center. So even though when one's in Bronxville, you don't necessarily feel that unless you're right next to it. If you're right next to it, you feel it. There's a very big difference from a 3-story building. So I'm just thinking about the future of what someone 20 years from now standing in the civic space sees when they're at Veterans Day, Memorial Day, or just there having an ice cream, before catching a movie. So how these work is that they limit building heights on a very specific view plane map, so that the further distance you get from a designated reference point or it can be a reference line, then you have different building height requirements. So that's it. That's what the idea is for discussion. And we don't have to do it tonight, but I wanted it.
Well, so let me just ask a couple of questions. At the moment.
Yeah.
The zoning in this view, the zoning above Manville
Mhm.
is 3-story max.
Yeah.
And the Burns Media Lab is that 3-story max.
Correct. And
So then below that, the slice of the pie that's between the post office and Manville Road is kind of what you are focusing on, right?
But again, I'm thinking about long-term future and not knowing what zoning changes might come in the future
So-
for the central business district.
What reasonable point, but if some future board wanted to increase the zoning, say, in the area where Lamb Design is from its current 3-story to 5,
Mhm.
that board would likely also be willing to eliminate a view shed that we had created. I'm not making this as an argument. I mean, you're sort of suggesting that in addition to addressing a current issue,
Mhm.
it could be sort of a bulwark against a risk in the future.
I mean, we're a representative democracy, so
Yeah.
we can't control what the
Understand.
future board votes, but it would signal an intention
Yes,
strongly.
so could you back
about-
up to the previous picture?
Yeah.
Okay, so that obviously looks a bit different outside the leaf season, but that picture doesn't likely look, or maybe that's better, right?
This gives you more,
Right, so you see that the Burns Media Arts Lab is built to the zoning max
mhm,
and the road slopes down further.
mhm.
So if anything on that side of Manville were to be built to the zoning max, Lamb Design rebuilds or the houses that follow, they would all be lower in this view than the Burns. So I guess what I'm kind of arguing about that is your proposal is more about the other side of the pie than it is about this. Am I fair in saying
Under
that?
the current zoning, but not necessarily under future zoning. Under the current zoning, the 4-story area would be the diner. It's about 6 properties
Right, so
back there.
same situation, we have this, no, it's all right, leave that picture. So we got this grade change. You have the hypothetical here,
Which picture do you want?
The one before.
the one before.
The snowy one, or is,
Yeah, so the hypothetical here would be post office gets redeveloped, right? The diner gets redeveloped. Could you imagine that the Diamond building that has Starbucks in it got thrown into some big potential development?
Right.
And that whole thing turned into a 4-story building.
All the way across.
That would essentially, the Valvoline building is down probably a full story.
Mhm.
So it steps down because of the grade change. But
Then there's buildings behind that as well.
right,
Property behind that.
but so, we had a version of this conversation where we were talking about selling the lane lot,
Mhm.
and you raised the same issues about that. And so the lane lot building is lower than the building that has Starbucks in it.
Mhm.
And so the likely it would be interesting to look at it, but I think the likely top of that building is not materially different from the top of the existing building here. So, but anyway, certainly if that whole zone got redeveloped, you could lose the view to the hillside beyond. Right?
I think you would. Yes.
Okay,
You would
so-
just see the
Yeah,
buildings.
so then back to your pie-shaped
And
overlay.
also, this photo is a little bit up, so, because I'm standing right up at the train station.
Because you're tall.
Yeah, because I'm
Yeah,
tall.
so back up to your overall diagram of your pie
Which one do
shape.
you want? This?
Right, right. So, the other thing to say about this is, and it's all about a set of guidelines we could employ with the hope that they would achieve a certain result, and they may or may not achieve it.
Yep.
But I would say that what we're proposing to do here, and we're going to execute this first piece of it now is build the so-called bosque. Some have said we shouldn't use that fancy pants word, with a whole bunch of pretty tall trees.
Yeah.
That are flanking the street opposite the diner.
Yeah.
And that creates a sort of a big forested edge, so to speak, in the form of a park. And so if you stood at the point you show here as the point of your pie shape, you're looking at this forested edge and probably a bit less significant view to the hillside beyond, potentially.
Maybe.
The view across Manville under the current zoning appears rather unlikely to change in a way that would occlude the view to the hill, right? Am I wrong?
No, you're right
That view isn't going to change much.
right. So this one I took to respond to your question about, well, what happens when we put trees right there in the civic space? I think you know, unless they're very tall, you would still have a sense of the horizon behind them.
Particularly in the wintertime.
I mean, that view.
But also trees come and go. I mean,
Right.
they go up, they come down, you change
That's the
them.
zoning.
This view.
Well, but
What'd you say?
That's the zoning.
large buildings are harder to.
So I do have a feeling. I have sort of two feelings about this. One is I'm completely interested in exploring it and hearing from experts about the impact that it might have on development and zone. My initial take on it is I like the idea of protecting part of this view, even if it has no immediate effect, probably particularly since it has no immediate effect, because I think I don't know what, I've never understood what direction the Jacob Burns is from Memorial Plaza, what cardinal direction that is.
Round figures west.
The Media Lab.
Yes.
So
Round
that,
figures.
yeah, that western view, I think really is majestic and omnipresent, et cetera. I think in that case, what would be the southern view, my feeling is that the unification of the village by expanding the business district, which is the goal of the 4 stories on Memorial Plaza, and sort of the long-term vision of at least, and I didn't read back to the 60s, but the 93 plan. I think that is probably losing the one hilltop for coming out of the train or coming out of the civic space and feeling like you're still in the downtown area of the village.
Right.
Might be worth it. But I'm open to hearing countervailing views. And I do like the idea of, even if it's something that any future board could change, they would have to actually say to sort of the village at large, no, we're going to take away.
I mean, it would guarantee that the issue would be on the table.
Yeah.
So to you hit exactly my point of walking off the train.
Yep.
When you walk off the train and you see the civic space and the war monuments, what do you see as the backdrop of that aesthetic experience when you arrive in Pleasantville for the first time?
Yep.
Right, just as when we had this New York Times write-up and someone read it and got on the train to come to town to see what's this town like, and that person gets off the train and walks off, right? And what's that experience for them?
Yep.
So the window or the angle, let's say, of the view shed could be narrow. It doesn't have to be. I just picked 2 spots, but it could be a more acute angle than that. That is more focused on what you're describing.
Yeah, I mean, I like the process.
Can I ask a practical question though?
Yeah.
So having watched you guys the subsection, you deliberate the changing of the zoning for that spot, the block, the sort of the focal question as to how big to make it was spot zoning driven. How do you, if you were to
You mean for the block?
contemplate this,
I don't think it was spot zoning driven. I mean, obviously, we couldn't have zoned just that one parcel, but
well, so, I mean, I guess that's my question is, how do you take from, say, the diner downwards? Can you do it?
Yeah.
Change the zoning so that you can no longer go 4 stories there?
Yeah.
Without running into
I
issues.
don't think you need to worry about the diner down. I don't think you need to worry about valvoline downwards. It's just the question really is the diner, the post office, and the sort of parking, right?
Sorry.
Go back to your winter view there, the
The,
snowy view.
the valve, are you talking about Valvoline?
Well, I said Valvoline, I think is less the issue because it's on a different grade.
Yeah, I was thinking more that
Yeah.
But I
like
understand I think your
Diner
question is about how can this be done
practically,
in
can you do it
in a way
practically?
that's fair, and I would say absolutely, it's done in other municipalities.
Okay.
These guys were joking that, they said you're gonna show your Denver ID now, so I grew up in Denver, Denver has this from every park, it's well
Denver's
established,
beautiful.
very detailed maps, on this block, you can build this high, on this block, you can build this high, on this block, you can build this high, all surrounding city parks. So it's really only done from public park locations. It's not really done from any like other intersection or.
They
There's
do
certainly
it
not
for the
private
Palisades along the river, the view across.
The view of the Palisades is another example of that.
So, I mean, you can see in this view that the post office is really not in play here, right? There's no view there, and honestly, I mean, further to the piece that David sort of touched on, it's a kind of dispiriting sequence of buildings because of their irregularity, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so, heaven only knows what the future world is for the post office. They don't own it, they lease it. It's awkward in a number of ways, but it's there. It's not in great condition. And I assume that whoever's sitting here in 50 years, it's going to look different in some fundamental way. The other building, the building, the former Cornell building that has Starbucks in it, has been there a long time, and I think is a vibrant and successful building. That doesn't mean it couldn't be incorporated into some bigger parcel. But I guess I would argue that if we were thinking about a pie-shaped view shed, especially the view sort of addressing, because this crosswalk is roughly speaking the end of the future civic space.
Mhm.
That's kind of the angle of the pie,
Yeah,
right? And not what's to the left of it, do you think?
so. Having the line be more like here,
Yeah, right? I mean,
you can see my arrow.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, this is a proposal for discussion, so.
So what if it were that, which I guess the diner would be in there, right? What
Look at
would
that, he just changed on the
I'm
fly.
just changing it around while we talk here. You could move it up. You like that?
So, and then what's the building to the right of that? Is that the Cornell building
The building to the right of what?
of your new third baseline?
There's the doctor's office, there's Lamb.
Are you talking
no,
about here?
he's talking on Memorial Plaza.
Yeah, that's it.
That's
Valvoline.
Valvoline.
Valvoline, okay, so Valvoline.
That's Belvin?
Yeah, I mean, you could make the height requirement, but Valvoline is gonna be under it unless it gets to 5 or 6 stories, right?
Where is the diner now?
So
I don't know.
here's Manville.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but
This is
that seems like a
Valvoline.
perfectly reasonable.
This is the diner.
Way to
This is
handle this
the
without really impacting.
Building with
anything that's
Starbucks.
gonna happen
This is the post office.
So
This
why is
the-
the diner no longer, I
But
thought that
I really
diner was
This-
the,
this is the diner right here.
no, I know, but why is that
Saying
no longer
We want
incorporated
people to
into
feel
the?
connected to the natural environment. We
Right.
have these
He
hills.
just changed
Since
that
we're in a
there.
valley, we don't have the river.
I know you
That'd be
changed it,
great.
but why? I thought we were saying that that was.
Can you go back to the side, the snowy view?
Weren't we saying that that was it? From there?
Yeah, it would be the point that would affect.
Well, so
And buildings,
I
And
would,
behind it, yeah.
I would make the argument that the realignment you made fulfills the logic of view from a park.
Oh, because
Yeah.
it's from here.
Yeah,
I
Right, but
see.
this is essentially the line of the
Right.
agent.
and that's why I made it a right angle.
Can we
with,
zone that the diner just has to be there?
It's been there a long
Although
time.
it does affect
Oops,
development opportunities for the lane lot if indeed you ever wanted to put that back on the board.
it does not. The lane lot would be out of the view shed.
In the new configured drawing,
Yep,
Yeah, well,
It is
further, I don't know. I mean, the idea of these view sheds is typically that you have a lower building close up and they can step up
Correct.
higher because
Correct.
you're looking up.
Yeah.
So I do think, and we could look at it, the elevation of the roof of the building being proposed on the lane lot is probably not visible behind the building that has
Because
Starbucks.
it is
It's
lower
not, I
down.
already looked at it. We did it already.
Yeah.
I have that slide if you
Right.
want to see as well.
Well, I think it's an interesting idea. I really do.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's more, Peter, what you were proposing
Okay.
as a,
Which
I
I
get it
think
now.
makes sense.
from that spot at the
And then the question, of course,
ground
right,
level of the crosswalk.
what would that be? Would you, and then this would be requiring more analysis. What would if you could slice through that and look at all that from the side,
Right,
what is the angle,
Correct.
the step up of the buildings?
and
that would
that's
be-
called the view plane. And
Mm.
then you create a reference line and then you,
This is where.
There must be
All
people
All
in
right,
Denver
Pepper,
who
make
that's
the
what they
3D,
do, right?
take the 3D model and sketch up so that we can just
We should
rotate it
get
in any way we
some
want.
I want a diagram.
All right,
Put right there.
so I think that's,
Virtual reality,
uh,
augmented reality on the ground.
interesting stuff.
Michael, can you send that?
this slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Well, that would take a couple of large pieces of 4-story potential development off the table, which would be not a bad.
good or bad, depending on your view,
compromise.
right? I mean, it would definitely take,
To my
Yeah.
mind, what's positive about it is that it has a compelling logic besides, let's just not have
Correct,
4-story
I
building.
agree with you.
But there's
It's
it's
a nice
it's
out of the
targeted,
box thought there.
it's targeted
Right.
to a civic good. Or that everyone enjoys.
And it leverages kind of what the village is doing now anyways, so.
Mhm, yeah.
And it will bring Jonathan around to love the civic space.
Jonathan already.
You know, the civic space that you're talking about doing right now, I talked to Nicole about it, talked to Peter about it. You're right where I suggested you should have been 3 years ago, honestly.
which is, we should just take that comment and run, just don't say anything further. Don't go further.
David likes to
close the
poke
meeting
there.
now.
It's gonna be the headline.
Okay, so, thank you for that. I think that's a really interesting thought. And so all of this comes back, not that we're making a decision tonight, but the
No.
question is about any of this. Are we of the view that we would allow the moratorium to expire with no changes? Which isn't to say that we would stop investigating all these things. Your view shed, we're affordable, that the proposals BFJ has created here. Or are we of the view that we would allow the moratorium to expire and on that occasion put forward some changes, for example, the ones BFJ proposed? Or lastly, that we would extend the moratorium. And the impact of that is largely, to our knowledge, focused on 440.
Was that 2 options or 3 options?
Three options.
So I would say option B, but, right, which is that we would let the moratorium, no, we would not extend the moratorium, but then we would look at, setting forward some proposals.
Well, that was kind of my option 1, which is let it expire
sorry.
with no changes. In other words, the status quo would be preserved and the moratorium would be lifted,
Right,
and the board would continue to explore all these issues.
right. And
Option B was to let it expire and say, we're gonna let it expire and we're gonna do X, Y, or Z change, including possibly the one the BFJ proposed or others.
the ones that BFJ proposed are, I agree with Jonathan on this, a little bit confusing to me, like they feel, well, I don't know, I'm sure there's, solid thinking behind it, but it feels a little bit like just a way to tweak it to get the numbers down.
Well,
And so,
I mean, that's what it is. I agree with that. That when somebody looks at a parcel to develop in the downtown, there are all kinds of tripwires. Okay,
Right.
great, I can have 4 stories, but I have to have X number of parking spaces. Okay, I can't build 4 stories because I don't have a way to make enough parking spaces.
right,
Okay, I can build 4 stories and I have enough parking spaces, but hold it. Now my FAR is too great.
right. No, I understand all that, but I guess Well, I mean, a simple way of putting it is I feel like if we're gonna consider making those changes before the deadline for the moratorium, we need to delve into those a little bit more. Like, I'm not comfortable with making those proposed changes just because, you know, they're what BFJ proposed and that.
No, I don't disagree with you about that, but we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't go through further analysis beyond what BFJ's already given us if our position is we're not trying to diminish development potential under the existing zoning at the moment,
Mhm,
right?
correct.
Yeah, I mean, I would favor option A. Because number one, I think that this has to be an evidence-based process. And the, pretty overwhelming evidence suggests that the zoning is working as intended and not creating undue burden on the school, on water, on energy infrastructure, on policing or emergency services or anything else. And as Paul said, I think it really creates a liability for us if we go the opposite direction from what the evidence shows. However, having said that, I do think that exploring changes that we could make to achieve some of the underlying concerns of village residents and as well as dealing with things like affordability is something that we should do. Just hard for me to imagine that we can do it in the next, 45 days or whatever.
All right.
My only input into this is that if the proposal that Michael put forward has any, if you're just not giving it lip service, but actually have got a real interest in exploring that,
Mhm.
there's several properties inside of that site plane that are actively being shopped for sale. So
That are actively being shopped
I
for
think the
sale now?
diner's for sale, Peter, right? Where they're looking at
The
selling the
diner has
diner.
been offered for sale. That's the
So-
only property I'm aware of that's actually being
If,
shown.
if you want to control that section still for this option, you might want to consider keeping the moratorium in place to explore whether or not this is something you guys really want to do or not. Because if they get sold in the interim, it may make your decision for you.
Well, let me just say one thing about the diner parcel unto itself.
Yeah,
First off, it could, it may not sell, or
May not.
the current owner may take it off the market. B, it could sell to someone who wants to run it as a diner and it says, maybe it is. But if someone were to buy it as a development potential site, it's pretty much too small to do much of anything. Because it's already non-compliant in terms of the amount of parking it provides.
unless Diamond bought it, for example, and wanted to do something with their bigger plans with their building.
To tear down their building, yes.
Or tear down there and do some sort of, I just throwing it out there that
Right, so again, I mean, I guess what I would say about that is a reasonable point. I am not, if in our further analysis, we should continue certainly to look at the view shed thing. If we thought that was a direction to go, I would imagine that we could get that in place. I'm certain that we could get that in place before any realistic opportunity for some accumulation to be created and to be proposed for those sites
Mhm.
and get anywhere near the point where they wouldn't be affected by that zoning change. So
Mhm.
alternatively, you could have a new but more limited moratorium, right? I mean, I will say most of the commentary we've received from folks who are concerned has been focused on Bill 44 as sort of what they felt like the straw was breaking the camel's back. What's yours?
Well, no, I'm just wondering what your position is between A and B, or C.
So
it doesn't sound like anybody understands. My own interpretation, I don't understand what the impact of BFJ's tweaks are
I'm having trouble
in terms of
pulling
the
it up.
overall development. Do you guys feel you're comfortable knowing exactly what that means for development? And if not, I would say,
I mean, there's no such thing as knowing exactly what that means. Because
do you
every,
have, do you have any sense of what it means at
Well,
all?
I mean, I'm
Sure, I
saying no
totally
or
have it.
not, so.
I
have-
do, but I mean, the board.
I have a very solid sense of how the various levers of zoning interact,
Right,
right?
I'll speak for myself, not for anyone else. What I mean when I say I don't know what it means, is I don't know the degree to which it will affect the potential developer's plans.
And nobody can predict that.
That's what I mean.
but BFJ can't give you a little fact sheet or give you
Well, but both
give
they've
you
said
something
is-
that shows you, this is what can be built now. This is what can be built if we put those plans in.
They did.
Right, yeah.
They did,
I mean,
yeah.
but there's no such,
It's in there, yeah.
there's no such thing as,
Numbers, I don't know.
but Jonathan, like anyone
Okay,
owns a
I
parcel,
think
there's
once you guys
so
are
many,
comfortable.
right, there's so many permutations of how someone could propose to develop a property.
Then why did
Right.
they, but, so what was the logic behind them proposing what they proposed?
Because they couldn't, there weren't any large levers that
I mean,
they thought were
one of
worth
them,
proposing, or legal, or.
you
know, they're very, very
analyze
small things.
what kept things from happening in the past. And the core piece that kept things from happening on the residential side in the downtown pre-2017
Yeah.
was the required footprint per unit. There's this graduated thing, you have to have X amount of lot space for a studio or one bedroom, whatever. You start adding up all those pieces and it made it extraordinarily difficult to achieve what you had to achieve and provide parking, and it pretty much knocked out a
I
lot of
get it, I get it.
And as a result, ever since that zoning existed, which dates back more than 20 years, pretty much nothing happened. And the reason for that was when that zoning was enacted when John was the mayor. It was imagined to be an opportunity to create more residential, but it didn't, because these various other tripwires got in the way. So in 2017, we changed that, and that could be changed back to stop things. That's the biggest.
No, but
Yeah, right.
I guess, the complication of all. What motivated them to suggest any tweaks at all?
Because we
Well-
said,
We asked,
right,
You asked what? What?
We said-
What were they
What could
trying
be
to fix with
changed?
those tweaks?
if the results of your analysis suggested that we should reduce development potential, how might we do that?
Okay,
And what might be, again, in the abstract, the impact of it?
What are
So
the levers?
So
you know?
what-
that's why she told us, here are we have a number of inducements in the existing zoning that say you can get a little more if you do this.
so you got their study, you paid for their study, you're
We did.
basing potentially lifting the moratorium off their study, so why not adopt their recommendations?
They're not recommending that we do this. They're saying if you wanted to do this, they're responding to our question. What are some of the levers we might pull if we wanted to reduce?
Well, they gave
development?
you a set of recommendations that you could pull, right? They gave you some tweaks, changes.
Options, it's
Right,
like.
so that would depend on us deciding that we should do that, right?
So how, I haven't heard any discussion as to whether you should do that or not.
Well, it's because we
That's-
don't all understand, just like you don't.
And it's because we keep talking to you.
Yeah. exactly.
Well, I think it's also more
Well, I mean, you guys, I thought I heard you guys sort of doing a straw poll on whether to lift the moratorium or not.
So I offered three options, which are kind of the three options that are out there. I don't think it's just mine. One is lift the moratorium, continue to pursue these things, but lift it, no changes. Two is lift the moratorium with certain specific changes proposed in the zoning, possibly these, possibly the view shed, whatever they might be. And option three is extend the moratorium.
Why wouldn't you do two? If
We
you're gonna
might.
lift the moratorium.
We're
why would
trying
you
to
do
narrow
two?
down our options here.
well, we
I will-
might, yeah.
I will say, I don't
We're
think,
trying to discuss that.
I don't think, yeah, I don't think we should extend the moratorium. Peter Shearsby.
Okay,
So I'm between 1 and 2, not 3.
okay.
And what do I think about that?
Well, I want to be clear, because BFJ did not recommend that we do this.
Correct.
Right,
There-
that was the
there may-
first recommendation. You don't need.
Yeah.
Like, you're good to continue with what you have.
Their main finding is that the 2017 zoning did not create significant, I'll quote, adverse impacts with respect to any of the factors that they were asked to consider. That's their main finding.
But. if
But
you
they
want-
said,
Okay, but let's talk about this. What do you guys feel about the three scenarios that Peter has outlined? So I'll speak for myself first. I'm interested in pursuing some of the things that we've discussed, I guess, because I understand the motivation behind it more clearly, and that's a motivation that I agree with. I'm more interested in what Michael has proposed and looking at affordable housing than I am necessarily in adopting the things that BFJ has said we could adopt just for their own sake. Although I'm willing to consider those, but I would want to delve into them more. So the reason that I was initially saying at least option A is because I feel like any of these changes are going to require more time to consider in depth. I mean, we could consider these changes within the window of opportunity, but if we did so, I would want to understand them a little bit better, and I would want to have a better understanding of the justification. So that's that's at least my initial thinking on this question. So no, I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say.
well, I guess, to the extent that BFJ, predicts what the elimination of these FAR bonuses and land area requirements would lead to,
Right.
it's table 13.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have it in front of
I'm
you?
looking at it, yeah.
So, I mean, option 2 is still a significant increase in development potential as contrasted to pre-2017 zoning.
Well, yeah,
It's,
obviously.
it's not all the way to what our existing zoning is, but
Yeah.
it's still an increase in development potential. So,
Right, but like but I mean, if the only variable that we're interested in is, reducing development, then yeah. But, I'm not sure that that's.
Would it help
the case.
if we all agree to narrow this down to the two options? If we all agree that we should not extend the moratorium, is that the case?
I agree.
I agree.
Mhm.
I agree.
Okay, so we're unanimous that we shouldn't extend the moratorium, so we're at two options. Right? Okay, so I think that's helpful. I'm gonna go talk to the planning commission and get their commentary, and I'll share with them, these other ideas and your viewshed proposal and all of that, to get their input on it, and they all have this memo as well. Perhaps as a follow-up to this meeting, I'll try to summarize the ideas that are floating around,
Mhm.
send that around. You guys will add or subtract if I missed something or got it wrong, but we'll have a sort of a blueprint of the things that we might undertake. And then ultimately the question is going to be, are we going to let the moratorium expire and then continue this review? The practical effect being, to our knowledge, very little, except it would allow 444 to go ahead. Or are we going to let the moratorium expire at the same time as we introduce some new changes
Mhm.
that might conceivably have an impact on 444? Although none of the things that have been so far surfaced are a dramatic impact on 444,
Mhm.
right?
I think the affordable housing piece of it, and tell me if you agree with this, seems a little bit too complex to figure out within the time frame that we're looking at.
Yeah, and honestly, we'll never figure it out. All we can do is see if we can create some inducements that will help.
Yeah, I'd just like to hear from, the
No, I think we should totally look into it, yeah.
Yeah.
But that can even come after.
Well, that's what we're,
Yeah.
yeah, same.
Yeah, I don't see anything that came out of this report that suggested that what we need to do is to stop development. If, of course, 6 months from now or a year from now, conditions changed and suddenly there were a bunch of adverse effects that clearly were created by development, then we could relook at the issue. But at the moment,
Yeah.
Would
So
it be too late?
just to be clear for anyone who may be watching this or listening to it in the future, that straw poll we just said that indicates that 5 of us are at this moment of the view that we should not extend the moratorium could change. Until the day comes that we vote, we could all make whatever change we want to make. I don't say that to suggest that I imagine that's the case. I say that simply to say anyone who's watching, folks who have an interest in any of these projects, there's no guarantee that we won't extend it, but that's where we are as of this round.
Yeah, and I don't think it will be too late if we see something happening that we don't like, because all of this process started after we knew that 444 Bedford was, in fact, going to be developed. That's actually one of the things that kicked it off, and we did in fact effectively delay that project through this moratorium.
I think that you guys do what you want. I mean, you've thought through this. My perspective is option 2 presents a bit of a acknowledgement to the community that we heard you and that we're going to take some mild strokes of trying to better get the slow down the development a little bit. Option 1 says we heard you but we're not doing anything about it. In my opinion, that's how it's going to get interpreted.
Right.
If I can speak for them, though, I think that all they just did was take half of the question off the table.
No, I know.
They don't have to look at A sub 1 and A sub B, right? They can look at what the tweaks might be, but they agree that.
I think I don't disagree with you.
No option includes keeping the moratorium.
Option 1 was to just undo the moratorium. Maybe I got it wrong. Option 1 is undo the moratorium, no changes to zoning.
Well, option 1 was to end the moratorium and then continue looking into some of these issues. So it's really more of a question of timing than a question of what we're gonna do.
They can
Right.
still do that.
Because from my perspective, part of the concern is that I don't feel like it's an emergency that, let's take the view shed proposal, for instance. I think that we have enough time if we let the moratorium run out and then take that up to look at implementing something like that before it would potentially have an impact or something would push against it.
I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just saying that my view, from this side of the table.
Yeah.
You didn't even need to do a moratorium then. That's what you wanted to do. You could have just had these discussions and
No, John, that's completely unfair.
Well, no, I agree. It's not fair, but I'm just saying that it's
okay.
Well, let's be clear, the narrative is going to be created based on what people write coming out of this, and you're one of them. And I think that it's spectacularly unfair to say that the moratorium was nothing when we spent money, time, and precious parts of our life figuring out whether the things that were alleged were in fact true. And that is significant. Fact.
Yeah, and I also I'm not sure that I want to, my concern is that if we do make changes, I want to make sure that those are the right changes and that we're doing it for the right reasons, right? Okay, if we're changing the zoning.
right.
And so if we can do that within the time frame that we're considering, then fine. But if it feels like it's going to be rushed, I don't want to make certain changes to the zoning just so that it looks like we did something. To me, that doesn't seem like a good justification, right?
I don't disagree with you. I'm saying that I'm trying to be political and say this in a way that doesn't get misinterpreted as negative. But if you've got a set of recommendations or whatever it is, certain levers that you can pull.
Yeah.
And 4 out of 5 of the board members don't really understand what the implications are in terms of the impact on what it will have with development. At what point do you have a responsibility to understand those before lifting the moratorium or not?
So I understand why you say that. And obviously all of us have a responsibility to understand them. I think some of what you hear when people say they don't understand them is we don't know and no one does, including the BFJ, what would happen in the field if we tweak this, tweak that, tweak the other thing.
Yeah.
What we do know is that we could make some of these changes and some potential would be removed from some projects by doing so. And what we also know is that if we went back to the pre-2017 zoning, all bets are off and
No,
the world
nobody's
is very
suggesting
different.
that. I mean,
I don't want people to
I mean, I'm
misunderstand.
not-
I don't want people to misunderstand
Right.
the idea that we don't understand as like, what the hell are you people doing? You're supposed, if you don't understand this, who would? How dare you? That's not what we're talking about here.
Correct.
I don't mean that we don't all have an obligation to dig into it, but we're talking about, levers, right? You turn the faucet part way and how much hotter does it get?
And we're talking about basically 10 private property owners. And what one of these levers might do to their thinking 5 years from now about whether to convert their property to residential. So it's very hard. That's what I mean when I say I don't know. Because there's so many variables involved in those decision-making processes for those private property owners.
Right.
And so one of the reasons we take, or I'll speak for myself, one of the reasons I take the ending of a moratorium so seriously is thinking about each of those private property owners and what are they, what would I be denying them of the highest and best use of their property and for what reasons? So it's.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what we would say to 444 Bedford Road if we were to, extend the moratorium right now. It wouldn't make any sense to me. But I do think that when people saw that and were upset by that, and that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, or the change that felt like the water was now boiling for the village or for people, and they coalesced around this desire to see everything cease. It stopped that too. So, I mean, I think that the fear that you seem to have that, one of these other big properties is going to get sold and it'll be too late to change it. I don't think that is true, because I think that we'll have plenty of notice before, any of that stuff can go to the planning commission and not qualify for a future, a future moratorium if that's what we want to do.
Although 70 Memorial got built as of right. I mean, it got built.
Well, yeah,
They
but
took advantage of some of the.
The changes that you guys
we made
made.
an
Well, right,
affirmative
because we-
change to
in
allow that.
2017, we changed the zoning and they decided to buy the property and designed a building around the zoning.
Well,
So-
yeah, I agree. I mean,
Well, but that was-
now that all can still
No,
happen.
but it was
and
intent, what I'm saying is,
I mean,
And you won't be able to change it.
we changed
takes
it
a long
knowing
time.
that that's what was going to
Right.
potentially transpire. So it was an intentional,
It's also, I mean, it's months,
Yeah.
months.
And part of the
get
response
that
why
also.
we denied the exception to 440 here was because we said that the timing it would take for essentially us to give them the exception, by the time that the moratorium is over, they'd be back in the same place. They didn't have that much of an advantage in that amount of time. Because they still have to get in front of the board again, and because they've left a lot of things that were unanswered. So that was also another reason that we had to explain why it didn't make any sense to do the exception if it was going to take the same amount of time to pretty much get back there. So that was what, back in, was it March? When we had decision on it? So April. So we're looking at, even back then, we already knew it was going to at least take at least 3 more months. And here we're talking about possible, a sale that's been posted possibly. Let's say we're talking about the diner, that there's a possible sale, but we don't know it's gonna, I mean, there's still so much that can happen. And the fact is that we didn't just start talking about this. We've been talking about this for a while. So a solution and agreement can come up pretty quickly. And
You've been talking about what, Paul? I'm sorry.
all of what our plan is, from why we did a moratorium to what we want out of it, and now the options that we have. Now we have different, if we go with I still don't see it as recommendations from the study that we asked to get done. I think it was more like, what's the alternative? So just in case we wanted to know. That's how I see that report. That's how I view it. Now we have another option that's been brought to the table, and it could actually work better if we do this instead of the other one. Now, the part of not understanding is trying to see what best fits what we think is the best way going forward. And I do think that for that, I also don't want to be rushed. I don't want to be rushed. And I think that by taking this time to moratorium, it's only guided me to make a better decision. Why at the last, part of the race, am I just going to rush it? When we've done so much work and we've done our due diligence in making sure that we cover everything. When we got our first report, it wasn't good enough. So we sent it back and we asked them to amend it with even some of the suggestions you made. And so, we've taken a really, I think, careful and I think very effective approach to this. Why rush it in the last part? Just to, and the idea to protect, the village from more development, but, it's not coming that fast. So, let's do it the right way. That's at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
We're so much closer than we've ever been.
I could take the Peter Sure attack and go, well, you would slow it down. Why rush it? Why rush to lift the moratorium? I mean, you can argue both sides of that, but I get where you're coming from. I think my concern is, and I'll write whatever I write, David, whatever sort of.
We'll write it for you.
conclusions I come to.
We'll take that off your.
And you guys are free to push back as you've done. I don't take personal shots, but I think I don't think I'm gonna have to weigh anything for a lot of people in the village if they've been following this and see that there is a 6-month moratorium, and at the end you're not making any changes, even though you're committed to still looking at some stuff, which is.
So you are absolutely right. Some people will view it that way. The basis for our decision has to be, as David has said, evidence-based, right? We have information before us. We may not all see that evidence in the same way as we synthesize action, but one of the reasons, me speaking, that I am currently of the view that we should not extend the moratorium is that we are harming the interests of a specific property owner.
Right.
And
Which I'm not unsympathetic to.
and we ought not do that unless we think that the action we would take would very significantly change what they propose to do. Some people have argued that we ought to do that. Tell them they can't have residential there, that it has to stay an office building, right? So that would be a radical change in our zoning, a radical change in really every aspect of our zoning that date back a long, long time, right? So.
Right, look, it's not easy, and I don't want to. I'm resident to say anything that could be interpreted by publicly about an individual property, other than to say there may be other ways to flexibly deal with those folks and still have a moratorium. But at the same time, it is. It's tough not to have an acknowledgement that there's ways to slow it down without stopping it.
And no one has said that we are definitely not going to do that. But I will, as you well know, there are people, not everyone in the conversation, but there are some people whose litmus test for this will be, did we stop 444? Right? There are some people.
Or did we slow down development like
you
that?
can't deal with those. I mean, those are tough folks to deal with.
Well, but the tough folks to deal with, from my perspective, are the people who said, we don't want development in the village. We want development in the village pause because it's going to create these 6 problems. And we spent money. We engaged the best professionals that we could. We did 2 rounds of research with increasingly conservative estimates. And we found that none of those issues were validated. And if you're going to basically come to a government body that has to defend itself in court against property owners and balance the interests of one group of citizens against another, against everything else, and say, I want you to do this because I don't feel good in spite of whatever the evidence says, I just don't think that's the role of government.
Well, I mean, the way that I would put it, which is a different version of what he's saying, is that the goal of the moratorium was to establish whether or not the current zoning was putting an undue pressure on those things, right? And so we did the analysis, we determined that the current zoning was not putting too much pressure on emergency services, on the school, and so on and so forth. So then, at the end of the day, you have to, so if we make changes in zoning, it's not going to be motivated by that, right? It's going to be motivated by something else. And so, and that might just be, you know, we don't want as much development. Why? You know, or we want to have, you know, preserve a certain view, or, you know, we want to have this kind of development and not that kind of development. And so, I think that those things have to be sort of clearly differentiated. The idea that like we need to make whatever kind of tweaks we can to slow down development. For me, like there has to be a rationale behind that, right? And according to the reasons for the original moratorium, there is no rationale. That doesn't mean that there can't be one, that we can't establish one. But if we do, we should be clear about what that is, what our goals are, right? Like,
And I am as evidence-based and pragmatist as anybody, and I get that argument. I still find serious flaws with the BFJ. I think it does not, I mean, the assumption that this block might not get developed because they're parking of it. The two biggest developments in the village overcame the two biggest impediments that you guys feel are going to halt development in other parts of the village. 70 Memorial went down 5 stories of rock to put that building in.
3.
2 above.
Were you after taking down the rock? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, Jonathan.
I'm just saying that.
But you say this stuff.
yeah.
It sounds logical and clearly at some level it is possible. That said, you look, for example, at the rest of the block there, and you've got all kinds of encumbrances, including the fact that all these properties are owned by different property owners, and many of them are encumbered by extended leases that would either have to be waited out or bought out. And you've got all kinds of issues attached to whether you have enough depth to actually achieve the things that would allow you to build underground parking, whether there's a way in and out. You know, what 70 Memorial had was a very big parcel with a 2 frontages. When you look, for example, at Wheeler Avenue, it's virtually impossible to imagine that anything on the track side of Wheeler Avenue could be significantly redeveloped.
Don't disagree.
Right? Nearly impossible. And that's very easy to see.
Although what side is that? The northwest side of Washington will almost assuredly be redeveloped.
Almost assured, yes.
And that's one of the spots that is identified in the BFJ analysis, right?
Except not counted as anything in the numbers, they're
No,
50 to
that's not
63.
true.
It is, yeah.
Most updated one.
It's in there.
It's counted.
Well, the number hadn't changed.
It's
Mhm.
They were 50 to
counted.
63 in the first one, and they're 50 to 63 in the second one.
No,
No, it changed.
Did it change?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry,
you
okay.
gotta read the whole thing.
So what's the new, okay, I'll look at it.
You know, and
I
she's-
saw they did.
And she
I read that.
stressed with us the difficult, like I said at the beginning, most persuasive to me was the difficulty of parking a lot of the soft sites, that one included. You know,
It is really difficult.
Mhm.
how do you get in and out of an underground parking structure there? You know,
They can have 3 stories there, right?
Mhm.
So
We
they
have
have
3-story zoning,
parking
which has
along the
existed for
second
decades
county.
throughout the A1 district.
Parking is really expensive,
Yeah, right.
underground parking especially.
Right. And I'm
I'm not afraid of spending money. I mean,
Okay, but again, he was able to assemble a parcel where there was a clear means to do it. I'm not saying anything's impossible, but what's economically possible gets a whole lot harder the more difficult sites you have. You will likely recall way back when, Benchmark at the Methodist Church. At one point we said, you know, God, this is a pretty tough site. And he said, believe me, I wouldn't be here looking at this site if there were any good sites left, right? So again, all that drives in value. Right, the property in a normal world, it's very hard to redevelop, you can get it cheaper. In the current world, everything's driving up higher value. Okay, how can I build something that's higher end? How can I build something that generates more rent? How can I, That's what the market does, and we're not able to micromanage it, nor should we. But you cannot live.
I understand your argument.
If you create zoning to make sure nothing you don't want to happen will ever happen, you have almost by definition created zoning that's such a narrow funnel that nothing will happen. And wait a generation and you'll be in a community that's
Nobody in
nothing.
this room is suggesting that right now.
All right,
So,
But,
may I-
but I only, again, I'm suggesting that option two, it could be viewed, if you could find a way to option two.
okay. Is this political advice or is this your?
it sounds like
opinion?
political advice.
I mean, if
Well,
affordable
yeah,
housing,
it would be the same.
You don't have to tell any of us what the impacts would be of any decision we make. We hear it all the time. Right?
Okay.
I know who will love me or hate me on any given issue. Obviously not everybody, but the universe of people who've been vocal. I know, we know. And as David already said, we signed on for this Solomonic venture to balance these conflicting needs and come up with what feels like the right answer for the village. And there are winners and losers out of that in their own mind.
So can we talk about next steps? So, I'm sorry.
No, we don't want to.
So,
Yeah,
Peter,
that's-
you proposed that you will summarize
I will,
the kinds of possible changes that have been under consideration.
that's what I will do.
And based on that, we can make a decision about,
Could we get
Option A or
BFJ
option B?
to just give us a little bit more commentary, whether it's in person or written?
Yeah, so I
on
think,
the potential effects of some of those.
yeah, we talked about having Susan tonight and I thought this wasn't the time. I think maybe the next meeting is the
Sure.
time to define whatever, an hour per time. to
We
say,
can do it in
Yeah.
the next,
You wanna-
however many
you're
days,
not
that's
at the
great.
next meeting, should we?
That'd be good.
No, we shouldn't do it at the, I really want to be there, so.
Yeah,
Whatever. We'll figure out the schedule. for
I
that.
mean, everything you can do to sort of disseminate these next few meetings to the public,
Totally.
not a Wednesday night or, meeting that's kind of unorthodox.
And what would be your view of having another auditorium meeting?
But I think it would be the bigger and broader the tent, the better on this issue, honestly. And again,
I mean,
And I said this every time.
I often agree with you.
invite people with a mailing, too, if you're gonna do that, not just collecting them.
Will we do it outside, like a field or something like?
No,
Big
do it
field?
at the high school.
But wasn't that pretty filled that time? I mean, if we make it,
Remember seats.
Oh, there was plenty of room. I mean, I think we had like 250 people, it seats 750.
Yeah.
So
That, you don't make those decisions.
I don't think we're at any risk of filling the auditorium.
Not in the middle of the summer.
But if we, offer a little intro song and dance or something.
should we allow ourselves a break?
Jesus.
All right, I think it's time to call it a day.
Thank you for doing this, guys.
Thank you for coming. You stayed the whole way.